Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Councilmember Dubiak.
Here.
Councilmember Solomon.
Here.
Councilmember Redondo.
I'm not a councilman to start with, but nor do I have a desire to be, but I'm here.
Yeah. It's been a long day. And committee member Marine is absent, and so is committee member Light, committee member Pinsler,
Here.
committee member Wenderly. Here. Chair Stressenberg.
Here. We all rise for the salute to the flag, please. Place your right hand over your heart, face the flag, ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Next up is approve the order of agenda. A motion on that. I would actually like to, I just realized I'd like to move I2 before I1, if that's acceptable.
And if the committee would allow it, I did want to pass along, City Attorney Webb is on premises. He is on deadline on a couple of items, and he respectfully asked if possible to put his item either to the back of the agenda tonight, or if you don't have any formal discussion on it this evening, to carry it into September as part of your next agenda. He's got a couple of things that he's trying to work through this evening. So he's here if you have questions for him on other matters, but as it pertains to item I1, I think he's comfortable with it moving to September if that's okay by the committee.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, City Manager Wasansky. We could move it to the end of the I items, and at that point, I don't think there's going to be anything, but we can see.
Yeah, there's that.
So we would move I1 to after I3. I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion a second, all in favor?
Yes. Why don't we just move it to after J?
Yeah, you can move it after J.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay,
And do it last, and if he's not available, we'll just pass it to the next one.
we can do that too. So
So,
friendly amendment accepted, or substitute motion you want?
And I'll substitute my second as well.
Okay. Substitute motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. Passes unanimously.
Chair member, I just want to make sure that Chairman, committee member Solomon posted the agenda.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, I did.
Okay.
We do have two blue folder items. Motion to receive and file those.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. The consent calendar, one item tonight, just to approve the affidavit. A motion and second, please.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. There are no excluded consent calendar items. Public participation on non-agenda items. This section is intended to provide members of the public with the opportunity to comment on any subject that does not appear on this agenda for action. This section is limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes to address the commission. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once. Written requests, if any, will be considered first under this motion. No written requests. Anyone from the public wishing to speak? Do we have Zoom or e-comments for non-agenda?
No, we have no Zoom or e-comments. Thank you.
Okay, hearing none, we can move on.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is for Ms. Manzano. Did you make a note in the record that committee member Light is here?
Yes, I saw him come in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we move on to section I, items continued from previous agendas. We will be starting first with section I2, discussion and possible action regarding the following articles related to contracts and purchases. Mr. Wazansky, anything new you'd like to add there?
No, just here, if you have any questions. I know there was going to be, I think, some drafting, perhaps by members of the subcommittee. If there's any questions on that, I'm happy to talk about it. Looking forward to reviewing whatever material is available. And if we want to do that over the course of a couple meetings or after this evening, want to move it to an opportunity where I can pull staff in to look at it and we can fine tune things and bring it back, we can go that route too. So I leave it to the committee members, and particularly I think Mr. Pinsler, who was going to work with you, Mr. Chair, on some language. So.
Very good, thank you. Which I did. Mr. Pinsler, would you like to kick this off?
I did do that, and part of this is dealing with, the order of it is important. And Article 19 seems to be the core element to all of this. The other things come from that. So if you look at, and I believe it was passed out, correct?
No.
Previously
it was.
the rewrite of what was there? I passed it along to you, and we are on the subcommittee.
Yeah, I did not submit it to staff.
Oh, okay.
For inclusion.
I was going to say, I didn't.
We do have the last version of it from the previous meeting, so. if that's-
Well, this is one that Mr. Pinsler had put together proposing some changes and how they might be written, I believe.
And the way I put it, perhaps I should just read it then, it's probably easier. Start with section 19, Public Works and Contracts. At the first city council meeting following the swearing in of a new council, the minimum value of every contract involving public works projects, including the construction of improvements, public buildings, streets, drains, sewers, utilities, parks, and playgrounds, requiring a request for proposal shall be set by ordinance. In all cases, either one, the lowest responsible bidder, after notice of publication in the official newspaper of the one or more insertions, the first of which shall be published at least 10 days before the time of opening bids, or two, the best value design builds entity or best value design build operate entity responding to a request for proposal shall be awarded. At that same meeting, and that's the meeting for the setting of the new levels, the minimum values, the value of public works projects by negotiated contract or by purchase order, and those which may be performed by employees of the city by force account, which may be let to contract by informal bids, also shall be set by the city council by ordinance. And then it says, during the 2 years between setting these values and the next required ordinance, any modification of these values shall be set by a 4/5 vote of the council. So basically what this says is the first organizing meeting after an election with new council members being set, an ordinance needs to be passed, is required to be passed, to set the values for the next 2 years. Those 2 years, during those 2 years, if necessary, a change can be made just like any budgetary change by a 4/5 vote. And once you do that, then a lot of other things fall into place, and parts of the charter can now be rescinded because they don't really have much meaning. Everything should be done through ordinance as opposed to through charter. And as we see right now, we don't get the charter review every 2 years, we get to it every 25 years. So the values get out of whack. So putting it onto the new city council to place that is the proper way to me, the proper way to go. And then what I've written also and edited is competitive bidding when it's not required, the contracts and who signs the municipal purchases, all of those things that are elements of this, but they all fall under the same construct, that it's done by ordinance and it's controlled by ordinance by the new city council. I believe that's some of what we talked to in the past, and I don't know if that's the way you would like to see it, but you can take I can pass this out and give it.
Yeah, I think just to comment briefly, and I think it's worth looking at in more detail, perhaps even in between now and our next meeting, we can kind of go through it together. But that sounds like a great start. And that, as you've heard me say at our prior meetings, our goal is, I think, to move it out of the charter, our procedures and amounts into an ordinance. And eventually that ordinance could even say, that the amounts are set by resolution. But I think your goal, which is a good one, is to ensure that new councils periodically, every 2 years, are setting these amounts and reviewing their policies and procedures as a matter of form. I think that's good. I think there are a couple of ways to do that. We could set that timetable as the first meeting after the election, or we could simply pick a date, every 2 years that they have to do it by, so it's clear as to when we're performing. But I think it's a great start, and if the subcommittee is up for it, I'd be happy to bring a team of my staff in and work on it with you and kind of look at it and provide any comments we might have.
Now, on the rest of these things, one of the other issues was mayoral signing.
Right.
And under section 19.1, what I've written here is it shall not be necessary for the city council to publish notice calling for bids or to receive bids as required in the following cases. They're the maintenance and repair. And it says when the city manager, following notification to the city council, finds and determines that the work may be done more reasonably. Now, in the past, you had to go through the mayor.
Right.
Now, the idea was to give the responsibility with the approval of the city council, a notification to the city council that the city manager is going to be the signer of these things. And that again takes the position of the mayor into a different structure. And we get into that with section 8.3 of Article 8 in a moment. And 19.7, which is all contracts entered into by or on behalf of the city of Redondo Beach may provide for percentage payments at various stages that at least 10% of the total sums, and that shall be withheld until the work is approved by a department and accepted by the city manager. In the past, there was a mayoral responsibility associated with this, and that's really unnecessary and cumbersome. But you have a notification of your approval to the city council. And whether it's by per meeting or as you do the warrants or whatever it might be, there's a section on the agenda which should be, this is the stuff I signed. And that would be so that anybody from the public can respond to it, or the council can accept it as a consent calendar item, or however you want to do that.
Right.
And then again, for municipal purchases, the city manager, following notification of the council, shall provide for the purchase of all materials. Again, you go away from the mayoral structure. It's cumbersome. Give it to the city manager with the approval of the city council and with notification to the public. So that's the way I would see that. Now, what this does for the mayor part, and this is Article 8, Section 8.3, for the mayor as presiding officer, rewriting that. So it reads, the mayor shall be the executive head of the city of Redondo Beach for the purposes hereinafter set, preside over the meetings, to be the representative of the city for ceremonial purposes, to sign all contracts unless otherwise assigned by the city council by ordinance to the city manager, to sign all ordinances, resolutions, and warrants, to approve all bonds as to amounts, to perform such other duties as may be prescribed by this charter or may be assigned by the city council. So what that has done is that it's taken that cumbersome responsibility away and streamlined the process. Again, all of this needs to be transparent to the public that these things have been signed, and that again can be done through similar things as the warrants.
Notification, right.
So that's the way I would be able to recommend seeing this done. I'm sorry.
So you're not proposing to strip out of the charter like section 19, you're proposing just to modify it.
Modify it.
And that brings me to my question of, you're saying that you want to do it by ordinance. Why not by resolution?
ordinances, to me, ordinances require a double hit. So there is an opportunity for people to respond and to give people a period of time to be able to change their minds, do alternatives. Doing things by ordinance has a level of legality to it, my sense is. That what you've done here is this is a 2-year, almost budgetary structure thing to do. Why not do it by ordinance as opposed to by resolution?
Well, to kind of follow on that question, theoretically, the ordinance itself could describe a procedure where the council, say, perhaps sets amounts by resolution. The ordinance actually would give, the ordinance can be written and approved by the council in a way that actually provides for another set of procedures, as long as it complies with the charter, that might create some efficiency in the amount setting process or something else. So even if it does say simply ordinance, the ordinance later could specify by resolution where it's appropriate.
But by definition, ordinances requires 2 readings.
Two readings, yes.
And this gives the council an opportunity, and the public, an opportunity to respond to it.
Not to oversimplify it, also resolutions are basically ceremonial.
Or what?
Ceremonial. It's an opinion. It's not a law.
Well, they certainly can be, and oftentimes they are. That's true. I will say our budget is adopted by resolution.
I understand it.
So there can
But
be
the
other.
budget,
Yeah,
but the budget can be changed.
it can.
But you've had public hearings on.
You
on
have.
the-
You
so
have.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not as though this is just something that shows up one week and everybody says yes.
Yeah. The one thing that does sort of come to mind, and again, I think this is a great start, and we want to look at this in a little more detail, but let's say every 2 years, new council looks at the process, looks at the ordinance and says, hey, you know what? No change required. We think the amounts are still good. They're still relevant. There hasn't been much in the change. We're going to choose to adopt as is, if you will, make no changes. Perhaps the process describes an ability for them to take that action in a single step rather than a 2-step process. The modification of the ordinance would require the initial introduction and then second reading. No change obviously would not. So you could see a scenario where it might make sense to do something in a single action. But I think there's room for that, even in the ordinance description, once it's ultimately adopted.
Yeah, so it sounds like kind of what is being alluded to here is that as we make these changes to the charter and assign them to city council, that it needs that ordinance at least to kick it off.
It does. It absolutely has to have that.
Then after that, I could see where every 2 years, it may actually become a bit cumbersome to do ordinance every 2 years. Like you said, even if there weren't changes, for example, because there might not be in just 2 years. We could see flat inflation. We could see possibly deflation, just if it wouldn't be prudent. And a resolution then, it would bring it back to the attention, and I think that's key, I do agree that every 2 years is a good number, that it should be looked at. I would use caution in some of the wording here, the swearing in of a new council, because these are the kind of things that can come back and trip you up. For example, if there was a recall and a new council person was sworn in, that is a new council then. What is considered a new council then?
New council, officially, the new council is when the city has a municipal election and at a normal council structure.
Mr. Morocco.
So we do a budget, usually it's approved by June, and the elections are usually in March or April. So
Unless
wouldn't it
it's a
be,
runoff.
what?
Unless there's a.
It's unless it's a runoff, but it's still before the final budget is approved.
We'll get
for
to
the
that
year.
later.
So why not put in there that every 2 years as part of the budget approval that we have to reevaluate it, since we're dealing with the numbers anyway at that point?
We certainly could. That's what I was alluding to. We wouldn't have to tie it to the election per se. We could tie it to every odd year by end of June, or we could set a date that forces that. I think there's a suggestion maybe to try to have that be kind of first order of business for a new council. So there's an education process. So you'd want to try to link the date, I think, as tight to that election as you can. But you could do either. You could absolutely do either.
If I could, I may have jumped the shark here a little bit, but one of the issues I think we're dealing with now, and Eleanor, you can chime in on this, is the desire to go to either ranked choice voting or to an instant runoff, which would make the elections be in March.
Could conclude in
And
March,
not have a
right?
May runoff. So if that were the case, then we wouldn't have the issue of May versus March. That's an issue that we'll get into some other meeting, I'm sure. But the idea here is, I believe, to move everything for cost purposes, for the most part, to not have runoffs. And if we go to that, then we will have a new council in March as opposed to May. Now, if we keep it, then the first official meeting of the new council will not be until May.
Right.
And that's when the ordinance will kick in. And that's why it was written that it's the first, following the swearing in of a new council. And if there is not a candidate, a council member in March, but will be in May with a runoff, then it would wait till May.
And you may want to add, just to be specific, to avoid the concern that the chair raised, is it following the regular general municipal election or something like that? So it's just clear that whenever we have a special election,
Yeah,
it's
however,
not in play.
Even with that.
This is more of a conceptual thing. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not wordsmithing.
Even
Yeah.
with that, we are still in a March election that almost changed. We fought it and we kept it. I look at these as 20 to 25-year changes to the charter that they should be able to hopefully hold for that kind of length. And within 20 to 25 years, things could change again, that we may move to a different election cycle. I'm not predicting that, but I would like to allow for things like that. And I've always seen this as more tied to budget season than election cycles. And I think that's the time when people's mindsets of the council and other people are focused in on the money aspects of things. And I would think that would a May or June timeframe be appropriate for the budget?
Yeah.
Because budget season, I don't think is going to change.
Well, yeah, and
law won't change.
not unless it's changed in the charter. But yeah, I mean, our budget season, I think, works very well, the way it's laid out in the charter currently. And if we were to add this as a companion effort every other year, we certainly could work that in, and I don't see that as a problem at all from an administration standpoint. It does delay slightly, depending on the timing of elections, the potential for a council to be perhaps indoctrinated into our policies and procedures, but it happens. But there's a lot. I mean, as you all know, when you're coming into a new role as an elected or appointed official, it's a lot to kind of absorb in a very short amount of time. So do I think that having that accomplished in May or June is still a pretty timely effort if we're electing folks in April or even March? Yeah, I think it's still appropriate. And but it's really up to the committee and its goals here. We'll make either happen if this is ultimately ratified by the voters and agreed to by the council.
If nobody else, if I
Mr.
could.
Chair?
Actually,
Mr. Solomon?
Yes. Gene.
go ahead.
Thank you, Spindler, Chairman. A couple of observations, please. One is that staff's time is very much stressed during budget season.
That's
And
what I was
this would
just gonna
be
get
adding
to.
an additional workflow into that. I wonder if not, we could give the council at the time and the staff at the time some other option in there where, in the absence of, or perhaps that's not the way of putting it, but that there would be a minimum COLA adjustment based on a CPI, no less than every 2 years and no more than every 5 years, so that if we did have a delay or for some reason it dragged into with heavy agendas, that there could be an option for the council to say, we're going to opt for the minimum at this time, but that it doesn't go for another 2 years and we have an incident in the middle of things where we need an increase. Another thing I would ask about, please, is whether or not there was a consideration, or should there be a consideration as to whether or not professional services contracting should be addressed here. At present, the department heads have great latitude for professional service contracting. And I would think that if we had a contract in excess of X number of dollars, we might want to have that go through a bidding process will also be tied to a bidding process. Wanted to thank Mr. Morocco for bringing up the question about the ordinance versus the resolution. I had the same thought. It could, if we have really busy agendas, to Mr. Pindler, where the first and second readings, we might get delayed. We might have consensus. It might drag on for quite a ways, which is another reason why I thought perhaps if they couldn't reach a consensus, an option for them would be to default to a minimum or a COLA, so the associated minimum, and be able to move forward with the budget. That's all I had on this. Thank you very much.
If I could. On the last point, once this process begins, whatever ordinance is in existence stays in existence, even though they're supposed to get started at the first meeting of the next council. So if they don't get it to the second or third meeting, that ordinance that was previously there would still be in effect. The second thing is that's one of the change during the interim is one of the reasons why the 4/5 part is placed. That the idea of having a mechanism to change it if some cataclysmic event occurs. That to me was what the 4/5 is about. And which is the case with the budget, except in cases where something new comes along and you have to add it to the budget, you have to do it with 4/5. But in this case, the idea is if the change is so much, this gives them an opportunity to be able to make this change. As opposed to the length of time, the rationale for 2 years is, and the reason to do it around the election is that budget time is horrendous for staff. It just is. And the idea of placing in the midst of this whole process, let everybody focus on that and get this thing out of the way prior to that, whether it's in March or in May, but mostly in March, because I am hoping that we'll discuss some non-runoff options. So by the time March comes around, you haven't gotten into the midst of budget time. And budget time has become more complicated than it used to be.
The other way to set that up would just be to simply say by the first Tuesday of May every other year. And then that way, even if we're still doing runoff elections that culminate in April, it would effectively be the first constituted meeting. And it's happening now in advance of the budget. While I'm still pretty busy, first meeting of May, but either way, we're busy in April too, getting prepped for the budget. So
I was thinking March.
But having it drop theoretically before the budget is due gives us a little bit of relief. And then that sort of, to your point, Mr. Chair, sets a date specific rather than tying it to an election cycle. Maybe that achieves both ends here.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'd even go so far as to set it for the first meeting of a month. I would tend to give it a month because I know meetings can really get agenda packed during the month of June, by the end of June, something like that, or by the end of whatever month, or during the month of, because it just loads it into what potentially could be already a packed agenda, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves at that point. But there's options to look at for that.
Frankly, to me, the concept is more important than the date.
Yeah.
Correct. This concept of how we go about doing this. If we want to set a date in April, it's fine. I mean, I just wanted to make this part of the beginning. Council's terms start and end at a certain time, and I just thought this would be a good thing as a time frame.
And I think even when we have a runoff, so we have an election in March and we have the runoff, we actually seat the council in April, don't we?
Actually, it's, the runoff is in May.
Oh, the runoff is in May.
The runoff's in May.
And we're seating in April when we have an election that
You
concludes in
seat the
March.
council member who won in May, but not the entire, the way that the charter reads is that the person stays in office until they are replaced.
Right.
And then this person is not replaced until the May election.
Sometimes
Well,
we
the
have it at
election's
the
not
end of May.
certified until 30 days after.
But
Sometimes we have it at the end of May which means they'll start the beginning of June.
Because it has to go through the certification process.
Yeah, and another thing to think about is if this is an ordinance, would it be we would set a target for just say ordinance, or does we set a target for first reading or pass
It's
by second?
consideration. I think it's a consideration item to begin with. And that, to be honest, if it, depending on how we prepare that ordinance, if it would be a consideration or discussion item for direction on changes, and then I suppose we could notice it in a way that would allow for the council the time to kind of initiate for first reading minor changes to the policies. But if they were substantive, it would have to come back, be drafted, come back for first reading, and then be adopted, and then effective 30 days after. So it might even take 3 bites at the apple to really get it done if it was.
End up being a 2-month process.
It could, yeah, and certainly when it would be effective 30 days after it's adopted. So it would, but again, that's the point, I think, is to have the conversation every 2 years, so we're not letting it get stale. It doesn't really matter when it
I
goes
think
into
that's the
effect.
key here. Mr. Light,
Yeah, I had a question about that. Is there any reason you can't put something in the language that it will be looked at that meeting, but if it is not finished by that month, it goes by your last cycle?
Considered every 2 years. I think considered would be the phrase there to meet that end.
The default makes it what it is.
Yeah.
We have a few
So
sort
then
of,
it's not 25 years till it changes.
yeah, but we have a few sort ofs in this charter that need to be fixed anyway, so.
So just to sum it up in the big picture, I think we are in agreement that this change is appropriate to make these number amounts be by ordinance or resolution and not have them simply prescribed in the city charter. I think we're all in agreement on that. I believe also we're all in agreement that generally 2 years is about right. It could follow the election cycles, as you said. It's a good time frame to look at it. It may just continue on. It may not change.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Considered and left alone could happen
Annually
10
is
consecutive years.
Too much. I don't know if we want to even consider language that at a minimum, no, every 2 years, I wouldn't want to I think 2 years works.
I think let's pick a cycle and stick with it. We do better when we have structure.
Yeah.
It's when it becomes ad hoc that we tend to lose sight of things. So I think every 2 years works.
But I think those are the key things here. In general, the committee is in agreement that this should happen, should be moved, the amounts and a few other details perhaps should be moved out of the city charter into the realm of city council and be addressed every 2 years. And the election cycle years would be appropriate. Anyone see anything different from that?
I have Committee Member Solomon raising his hand.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Clerk Manzano. I agree with that. I'm wondering if, as a committee or a group, we don't also want to consider asking staff for input now as to what recommended limits we would change right now. If it's going to be a charter change, we want to update those numbers right now, or have the council have a discussion about updating the numbers, not just the idea that the numbers should be updated every 2 years.
Just so I understand, are you adjusting like the 50,000 that's in section 19?
Yes, they're removing that.
I'm asking Mr. Solomon.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, the recommended numbers, the tiered system that was established, that was recommended or reviewed, updating perhaps the numbers to conform with the staff recommendation there as our recommendation to council, in addition to the charter change that's being reviewed on a 2 year cycle.
I thought you were asking whether or not the numbers that are in the current charter are appropriate, and asking for an opinion on what they would be changed for too.
I am asking for that, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, Mr. Solomon, you're asking, is the 50,000 that's in there now, what's the ballpark that we would look to change that to? Is that kind of your question?
Yes, because the minimums as we have them now in the charter are very low.
Yes.
So if we're going to propose changes, I think as part of that, we should forward to the city council recommended changes to the existing numbers as well as the process.
I disagree. I'm sorry, Gene, but I think what we're saying to the council is, we think you should take numbers out of the charter. And here's a recommended way of putting them into force, so that when this charter, hopefully when this charter amendment is approved by the voters, you will know that the first thing you need to do is to set those numbers. Keeping numbers out of this is part of what this is all about. Because 25 years from now, when other people are sitting up in this, on these chairs, they shouldn't be looking back saying, what were they thinking, putting those numbers in there? So I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that's fair, Bob. I would just maybe make that really clear
Sure,
to the council
that's fine with me.
that we think the numbers do need to be adjusted.
Yes.
Mr. Wozanski, are you willing to even offer a number that would?
Oh, I would be happy to, and I would respectfully request that you let me drop that for you maybe next month, when I can really talk to staff and try to come up. But candidly, I mean, I won't be shy about it. I mean, where it says 50 right now, probably should say 250.
250.
You know, I mean, and where it says 5, it should probably say, 50. So I mean,
I think that's fair to know. I think, Mr. Solomon, that's a great question. I think it's interesting to know that and have a feel for things, but not to put it anywhere in the language.
No.
Just as,
I
because
gather
the city
that
council's
as
going to have to face it. if
being
it
kind of
passes.
signaling sort of where we would be going with the ordinance, so the community is assured that this isn't some crazy, unlimited, process, but something that would be in an appropriate ballpark. But I would be happy to provide some suggested amounts in the event that we had an ordinance to draft.
In reading some of the language and what was sent out, it seemed like the state controller also set some numbers as a general suggestion, right?
They do, and for those cities that are not charter cities, they are subject to those limits.
Those limits are?
Yeah, 250, I think, might be the
Okay.
current one.
That makes
Or
sense.
200, it's in that ballpark. Andy and Robert could probably tell you right now, but it's in that range.
So would a factor of 5 be fair for the 15,000 to make that 75,000?
Generally, yeah, I think that is kind of what we're looking at.
And that's fair to know.
Yeah,
These are 25-year-old, minimum
these are old.
25-year-old numbers. They're probably older than that.
in some cases 40 to 50, yeah. But I'd be happy, if that's what we're talking about, signaling kind of that figure, I'd be happy for us to be prepared to do that for the council and let the committee kind of weigh in on that. Again, my request would be here, if we can, look at Bob's language and spend a little time on it between now and September, and come back with something that we could put in your agenda packet in September that you have in advance of the meeting, and we can kick around again.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fair thing to have as part of our consideration in our records, in our minutes. Not that we wouldn't recommend that going, as part of our recommendation.
Yeah.
But to know that as part of the understanding of what are we really dealing with, that's fair to know.
Because really, at minimum, this is where these numbers should be today. That's kind of what we're stating to the public. But we think they should be set by ordinance into now and into the future, because they should be adjusted periodically.
And frankly, in the discussion that ultimately goes out to the public when this is going to be approved, this should be stated.
Yeah.
If these were set in 1963, and it's time to change. And if you have had that discussion as part of the ballot measure, that would explain it all.
Seems like an obvious thing that the voters would understand.
Yeah.
Actually, the charter says that section 19 was amended last in '01.
We don't.
Well, which parts of it?
doesn't
I don't
say
know.
what part.
That's the part I don't know.
Not the amounts,
kept
I'm certain of that.
I'm sorry?
Not the amounts, I'm
Not the
pretty certain of that.
Oh, okay. If you say so.
It's interesting.
No, maybe,
Part of
maybe I
this-
should. Let
I'm-
me take that back. I don't know.
Okay.
Part of this wording would not prohibit that they could adjust downward if they thought that that
Right.
was fit.
Yeah, we have deflation for 10 years.
And that's
maybe it
fair.
goes
We're
down.
back to the ordinance now.
Right. Yeah,
We're talking about eliminating this.
this is-
We've got the big picture of,
Right,
This
I
is the
think we're in agreement
structure.
on that.
This is the recommended structure.
right.
And that we
really what
would
this is about.
come up with some wording. And I think, not just the recommendation to do it, but to offer some wording for council consideration. Is that,
I,
Mr. Duziak?
well, we're really talking about getting rid of 19 and rewriting. it.
Rewriting.
I mean, okay.
In
And
fact,
I'm all in favor of that, by the way.
I passed this along and we just didn't get the committee, we just didn't get to it.
Now, I was going to say, I got to see the language
I'll
before
pass
before
this
I
out.
agree to anything.
I'll pass this out.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd like to see, I think it'd be good for the committee, is when changes are in there, similar to how the PowerPoint was presented, if language is changed, highlight or italicize that language, because I spent a lot of time just comparing to existing. That's much easier for a read-through of
Fine.
any other committee member to see what was changed and what was not. Yes, sir.
One more thing. Eleanor, can we get what those changes were in 67 and 01?
Okay, yeah.
And 89.
Yeah, there's
Three of them.
Yeah, there's three, I think.
I mean, 89,
67,
yes.
89,
Yeah,
and
definitely
01.
89.
As amended.
89 and 01 are more important than 67.
So when was
Mr.
the
Morocco.
when was the first?
So you also mentioned, Mr. Penzler, section 19.7, which I think there was a conflict with the state law with regards to the holdback of 10%, but the state had 5%. Did you make any changes to that?
No, the only thing I included here, I basically kept a portion, the only change that was done in here is how the structure of it. And again, you have the copy of that there, of what I wrote.
I don't have a copy of what you wrote, but,
That is what
but I do know that when we first talked about it, there was a discussion about the 10% holdback versus the
I still have
5%.
10% in there.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Can I ask a question there, John? Is the 10% for municipalities? Because I thought private contractors held back 5%. So is this a,
yeah, I think you're remembering that I believe now state law may allow us to only hold back up to 5. I think,
I'm asking, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
it's
I
an
think-
informational question for me.
yeah, I think Andy mentioned that we are no longer by law allowed to hold 10. I think
okay.
5 is now the cap. And I think, so that's what I was saying. There's going to be some things in here we may want to tighten up, which I would suggest we do candidly offline and bring it back with strike throughs so everybody can see the before and after, and we'll have that packaged up for you in September.
Is this a charter city issue or is this an overriding state issue?
Yeah, I think this is a state law, case law practice now that is occurring that where I think 5% is the more common. And I think now that's what we're doing by practice.
I know that's a fact for
I
private
think it is.
contractors.
I think it's,
I was wondering whether or not that 10% was,
I think, yeah, I think by practice now we do it to 5% because of current state law. Yeah.
that was an educational question for me.
Okay, that's fine.
And then section 20 is listed as number 1 here, 20.1. I don't think we covered that.
Let me see.
Approval of demands.
I'm pulling it up, the staff recommendations here.
I didn't see anything.
I'm feeling left out because I don't have any.
Yeah, staff, to be, the issue of what's been delivered and what's actually, what amount is legally due.
Yeah, I think our issue was we wanted to be able to provide for an advance.
Yes.
I think, so
Whereas
we could do
the current wording
deposits.
says have
Yeah.
actually been delivered or
Yeah.
rendered. And that would preclude an advance, and that's what we're looking to.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear any opposition to that. I think that's a fair
Deposits.
thing to do. So we would include that as part of our committee coming back. Ms. Morocco?
So my notes from when they did the presentation is that you're looking for more flexibility in that. And I think we discussed that as far as what is actually delivered or approved, that it would be not disputed by city staff. The actual amounts of that, that was one little addition that we were talking about.
Yeah, I think and I believe the problem we're trying to solve here operationally is this issue where we're getting hung up, and you could read this to say we can't provide a deposit for goods that we don't have possession of.
Yeah, your two options were, option 1 was
Yeah.
basically to add a clause, an
Yeah.
amount that is legally due
Right.
under your contract or
Yeah,
so
under the,
forth.
whatever that is.
Whereas option 2 just adopted basically a suggested city of Torrance language that this is an ordinance.
This is something
Issue.
just described elsewhere, yeah.
So that,
There's also a phrase in there that I don't understand,
Yeah.
which is the last sentence. All payrolls shall be certified. Why does payrolls fit in that?
It doesn't. I guess it's the demand in the sense that payroll is it's how we pay our employees. And so it is a demand as it pertains to payment, but it is odd.
Wouldn't it have to do with liens?
What ended up happening, if you look at the really old minutes,
I think it's just it's a section, it's an appendage sentence that's been put in approval of demands. I think at the time, demands has been viewed as any demand on the
My
budget.
point is that for the contracting law is that they have to get a lien release from every subcontractor. So if the contractor doesn't provide those, then, and you sign off, you're liable for the lawsuit.
Yeah.
So the question is that what they're referring to here?
I think they're referring to our timesheets. So when our department heads, whenever we have people fill out their timesheets, right? Police, fire, public works, department heads have to sign off on those timesheets. And then ultimately, those are later approved by me.
But this is about approving work that has been done.
not necessarily.
This is, we're getting into a semantical argument.
Sometimes we have force account where work's being performed by staff. So I think this isn't just, again, it's just an
It's
odd
a
place for
semantical
those two.
argument because that sentence reads, all payrolls shall be certified by the respective department heads and approved by the city manager. To
Yeah,
me, that, if I was interpreting that, I'm saying that the contractor has now certified to me that everybody's been paid, there are no liens, and we're moving forward. That's how I read that sentence, but we may want to clean that
It's
up.
confusing.
Mr. Morocco.
I think I think it deals with actual employees.
Yeah.
Like in the old minutes, they used to have a section of demands. If you look in the 50s and 60s, you will see a whole thing of demand. So if you pull that out, you may find that your employees can't get paid because there's no structure in either the charter or in an ordinance that basically allows them to be paid for their work.
The section head deals with the demands by contractors.
All demands, it's all demands. So and that includes payroll.
Maybe, okay.
Well, Mr. Solomon,
Like I said,
any
we need
comment
to-
here?
I do know that there's not a lot of structure with regard to the finance director and the manner in which that person directs or has oversight there. Those things were held by the treasurer at the time. So I think if you clean some of that up where maybe we were able to clean up in other parts of it, for lack of a better way of putting it, the job description of what the finance director is doing, which could include certifying the payroll.
So this, just to be clear, to your point, this is actually we're talking section 20 now, which is funds, disbursements, and
Right.
liabilities.
Right. It's
So
20.1.
this goes beyond, I think, contracting. And I think I do believe that payrolls here is technically our pay cycle
So
for
it's a
timesheets.
city payroll,
employees, yeah.
so we need to clean up that language.
Yeah, I mean, it's working for us now. I mean,
Yeah, because nobody's questioned you.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm reading this as they're just saying payroll's different than all demands.
yeah.
It's not worded very well, but that's what they're
It's
trying
not.
to say. It's not approved by city manager and city clerk. It's by the department heads and city manager, as opposed to city manager.
There is
and
a
city clerk.
process at the city.
Yeah, there's a very restrictive process, but this, I think in this case, demands is a demand on the budget. This is
Well, doesn't it
approval
get
then use
listed
of
in the
funds.
consent calendar as payroll demands?
Yeah, our timesheets are ultimately covered under warrants, again, like everything else. It's retrospective, but it's just wonky. But again, I think that part of, it's almost like there's two conjoined issues here occurring in this particular provision.
Okay, Mr. Morocco, one more.
So what is our next step? Is it to come back at the next meeting with something in writing so that we
Yes.
can vote on it?
We could vote on it. We could get that far with it, at least have it more fine-tuned and
Is it to get it to the staff
Refined.
so they can actually give us feedback at the next meeting? So do we need to?
We're happy to do that.
We have some written options here, and we can pass that along well before we get to our meeting, so that by the time we get to this meeting, the next meeting, we will have perhaps strikeouts to be able to look at.
yes. So one of the things under this 20.1, and it's a fairly simple and straightforward revision, but the two options bring up, to me, two very different strategies for doing it. One is amending the city charter minimum changes, what do we need to change and leave it in the city charter. The second one is to basically, it states it in the city charter, but the option 2 was, it just moves it to ordinance flat out. Whatever it is, says all demands are now under city ordinance. I'm curious to know if any of the committee has any thoughts as to how the voters might receive changes like that. Would a true amendment to the charter, I mean, just changing the language be more palatable, or would just taking it out completely and saying we're turning it over to city council? I don't know, but I'm open to hearing as members of the public how that might be perceived.
Well, I think that there is actually another issue in here, which is, and we will get into that when we talk about the responsibilities of the city clerk, is that where does the finance manager sit? Finance department sit in this? It's not even listed here. By assumption, it's under the city manager. But the city clerk structure is an old and strangely organized system. No disrespect to.
Yeah, let's come to that under city clerk
This
then.
goes back years.
Right.
And
Let's stay on point here, though.
No, because we're talking about 20.1. The fact of the city clerk being in here, as opposed to perhaps the finance director or just the city manager, that would require a charter change, but if we wanted to delete the city clerk out of this role. So we're going to have to go, this will come to the voters as a compendium change. There will be multiple changes that we're going to be recommending. So we're not just showing them 20.1. We are showing them all of the hopefully when we get to the end of this, all of the pieces that now work as a more modern city charter than we had before. And this is one of them. And that piece about the city clerk is a piece that needs to be discussed.
I can discuss that.
Okay.
If the clerk is elected, we're back to who's going to be elected and who's not.
Well,
If you substitute in there finance director or whatever you want to put in there, the people will reject you in a heartbeat. Because
Because you
they
have
want to
two
be,
non-electeds.
they want somebody they can elect. So
maybe.
well, anything's a maybe. I mean, we can get out of here tonight is a maybe. Yeah, good. I'm not a fatalist, by the way. I'm a realist.
But he's
But
close.
the point is, if you change that and you take away, I'll just say, a voting right, the argument is going to be made, you're disenfranchising them and you are democratizing it. I'm overstating it for the effect, but the issue really is you're taking away a check and balance that people feel, I'll just say, already a little shaky about.
You may be correct about that, and history
I
has
may,
shown
Mr. Chair?
that. I'm sorry, go
Go ahead.
ahead, Gene.
If I may, to Mr. Dwozniak's point, so the Moss Adams report that reviewed roles and responsibilities and a number of different procedures within the city identified as one of our significant problems that there is not any structure or relationship of what the finance director is or does in the charter, and that there is gaps in what are assigned roles between, let's say, the clerk, the treasurer, as the elected, and the finance director's office. So their recommendations were for us to, as a city, to add the finance director's duties to the charter. Now, whether or not that be here or somewhere else, this was a review that was initiated and conducted as where our weaknesses are as a SWOT analysis and identifying the fact that there aren't any defined duties for the finance director or clarification of these rules. So I think just as a bigger picture, maybe it is better served when we talk about the clerk and treasurer. I think that's why we may want to consider having the finance director in there, at least with some language as to whether or not they would be handling certain roles and responsibilities.
Are you suggesting adding the finance director and deleting the clerk, or adding the finance director?
adding the finance director, or at least clarifying the duties of the finance director within the charter or in some ordinance.
I don't disagree with that, but when you do that, are you going to take away, I'll just say, approval? The city manager right now chooses the finance director. It's a department head underneath him. So are we now going to put the finance director in the charter and have the council approve the selection of finance managers? Or are we going to leave that with the city clerk? And because there aren't any other department heads really in the charter. So how are you going to handle that, I'll just say, anomaly?
Well, I think what has happened is, what is going on is that's already happening, but it hasn't been formalized. It's an informal process. So from the Moss Adams report, the Financial Services Department is not established by the city charter or municipal code. Therefore, its roles and responsibilities are not formally defined outside of the finance director's job description.
I don't
Much
disagree.
of the Financial Services Department's work has been informally delegated to the department over time. As a result, the department conducts city's financial transactions and provides reports to elected officials, but does not have formal authority or agreements in place to define their roles and responsibilities.
Is there mention of finance director in the city charter currently? It is not. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure I didn't miss it somewhere.
Well, and there's not, I would add, there's not a mention of any of the appointed
And
department
the
heads in
reason
the
for that
charter.
is because
Right.
they fall under you,
That's exactly
and you're
part of my
responsible for the city
responsibility.
manager.
Right.
I mean, excuse me, the finance director.
yeah.
You're also responsible for the city
Yeah.
manager.
I mean, I agree with Mr. Solomon, and he and I have spoken about this. And Eleanor knows this too. We've talked. There's confusion in some of our elected department heads' roles, particularly as it pertains to financial activities in the city. That's clear, and I think defining those, I think, would make sense. But I would respectfully suggest that we not a clarified department head positions, because then the presumption could be if I don't have police chief in here, well, what powers and duties do they have, right? We have to have a mechanism for us to be able to describe, we may create new department head positions in the next 10 years, whatever they might be. We want to do that through budget and through other actions, and
there's nothing to prevent council from independently addressing that issue.
Absolutely.
And creating a definition or basic roles and
And
responsibilities.
we do it through our job specifications. We do it. And where I think it gets muddy here is we're administratively, to Mr. Solomon's point, we're administrative creating process for the finance director that they follow and have authority over. But then when you check that against the roles and responsibilities of our elected department heads who also play in the budget and finance world, it gets complicated. And that's I think, ultimately what needs to be clarified.
The
Yeah.
public creates the department heads
Right.
that are elected.
Correct.
Right? You choose the department
rest of
heads
them.
that you feel that you need to run the city.
If-
Okay, two different subjects.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could. Whether or not the city clerk is elected, that's another story. But there are artifacts in this charter of what the roles and responsibilities of the city clerk are.
Then we amend those,
That
then we
go back,
address those.
and the major one that I would change is the stuff that's associated with the budget. And, because that really,
I think that's on a future agenda, though.
Right.
no, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. You say if you take the word city clerk out of here, people are going to vote against it. But if the positioning of this, because all this is about financial issues. And if we take the budgetary responsibility that's in the charter now, which was put in by a specific city clerk, as I understand it, for job protection, it really doesn't belong there. This is an artifact. It's one of the artifacts of this charter. And if we remove that and we make the case for why that should be removed, then those three words that come out would be just fine.
So I have a suggestion moving forward. So up until this point, I'm actually was comfortable lumping all the pieces together, but in the discussion about how we get this to the voters and get them to approve it, we're making it way too complicated. And Mr. Pinsley, you've been really helpful, at least in focusing me on what is going to be the ballot proposition argument in favor of something. And I think it may be a good exercise as you write up the report to start thinking about the ballot proposition, what would be the argument in favor? And you may look at it and you say, you know what, we have a really good shot of getting 19.1 and 19 taken care of. We keep it separately, and then we present it to the council as these are two propositions to get to the ballot, and then make it, simplify it, because people are not going to vote for it if they don't understand it.
Exactly right, but there is a question about whether all of the changes are presented in one ballot measure, or if individual changes are presented.
Right.
Are there 15 of those?
In the
For
past,
example, the issue
we've done that.
of gender neutrality.
In the past, we've done that. It's been every kind of proposal to change a different article has ended up as its own.
But there are cities that when they've done charter changes that has presented a fully fleshed, single issue charter change. It has been done.
Okay.
So there is the choice. It's not our choice, it's the council's choice.
That's true.
What our thing is to recommend to them what changes we see need to be done. What the structure is their responsibility. How it gets presented to the public is their responsibility. For us, we need to tell them what changes we would like to see, and then they make the choice.
And why. These are the changes
why.
we see, and this is
That's
why
what
we
we
see
want.
it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're good on this. That covers the sections that were listed there under I2, unless anyone has any final closing. Mr. Solomon, are you good to wrap up here? We'll continue
I'm
this
good,
item.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we'll pass along the writing that we've done.
Yeah, actually, can you, Committee Member Pinsler, if you can email it to me?
Yeah.
Or,
Let's hold, can
and
we,
then remember, if you do anything new, only, is it 3? Because you don't want to have a quorum outside.
No. We were the subcommittee. I passed my writing along to Rolf. He's still working on it. So once we finish up that, we will pass that along to
yeah,
everybody.
and with that, we'll have it italicized or, strikeouts and make it clear what changes.
Whatever you send to me, I'll sit down with our folks, and if we all want to come in and talk, we can, or we can just provide our comments, and I'll shoot it back as a bit of a strike through suggested changes, and then ideally we'll try to get whatever that document is into your packet for the next meeting, so
Yes.
you all have a chance to digest it.
So the rest
a
of
little
us aren't
time.
going to see it till the next meeting.
We'll see it before. You can see it before.
Can
Once
we,
we complete it and pass it on, it
Yeah,
can get
you could
passed
do that
along as soon
too.
as-
Yeah,
as we
whatever the
can.
two of them submit to
I mean, the one
us,
you have now.
circulate it to all of you.
Because you're giving it to us, receive and file. But if you do any changes or any other main thing, it's only going to be to 3 of the committee until the next meeting.
It's just, well,
Right, we're just,
unless we give it to everybody.
well, then it has to go to the public.
Sure,
We don't
that's
have
fine.
We don't have a
Have an agenda to post.
agenda at that point.
Well, Bob's current version is already, can be
Right.
disseminated to everybody now and made
That's what I'm
available to the
saying, the
public.
current
The
version is
difference
fine.
would be whatever occurs
but they
between
have
now and then.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't have it.
well, right, yeah,
I'll get it to you.
yeah.
Okay.
Just,
Yeah.
if you can.
That's a good
have
place to
it.
start.
Right, you will
My
have
point
it.
is, we're talking about something
You will
I
have
can't
it.
read, huh? Okay.
Yeah, if I get
got
an
that
email,
part.
I can
I will
forward
have
it
it.
to everyone
Okay,
and put it on the website also.
okay,
Thank you.
got it.
okay, Mr. Solomon, did you have anything final? Were you cut off there?
I'm good, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to, oh yeah, thank you.
We're going to receive them.
Constantly miss it. Anyone, public comment on I2? Zoom or e-comments?
None.
The crickets remain. And a motion and second to continue this to our next meeting.
And receive and file your,
My comments.
Yes.
I would prefer not to receive and file because we haven't,
because of what Eleanor just said.
I've already read
No.
them, so I have.
No, yeah, since he's providing
I
it.
read them, I
and you
read
guys
them.
have discussed it. You,
I'll just give it to you.
right. Right, it should be received. and
Okay,
filed.
I don't want to be sticking about it. When do I get it?
As soon as she
When do we get
receives
minutes?
and files it.
I can forward it.
Oh, wait a minute,
what is
Eleanor, I'm sorry.
coming, what you will receive is from Mr. Pinsler only. It is not the two of us.
when am I going to receive what you got?
We'll be doing it before the next meeting.
It is now received.
So I will receive a copy of whatever you're going to submit for us to discuss in the next meeting, before the next meeting.
But 3 days before.
I was actually under the impression that it would have been available,
right.
but we just never got to it.
Yeah, we'll scan it and then we'll email it to everyone.
Okay.
So when do we report back to the council? This is going to take till next June.
No, it's not.
November, first meeting in November.
That's right.
I got that.
Okay, so public comment, motion a second to continue this item I2 to the next meeting.
Aye.
But I need a motion and second.
Oh, that's my motion then.
Okay.
Whatever you want. I just want.
Mr. Light was the second.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. Passes unanimously. We will continue I2, and we will get together with you, Mr. Wazansky. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks. You too.
Item I3, discussion of possible action regarding implementing gender-neutral language in the city charter. Ms. Wonderly.
Okay, well, hopefully you all received and can get access to the proposed recommendation to City Council. And there's some options on there in terms of presentation. I think presentation has been discussed. It was clearly an issue the last time they decided not to do this because they didn't want to have to rewrite the whole charter. And so Committee Member Morocco and I had some conversations about, on the subcommittee for this topic, what could be the most effective way to present this to the public, and came up with two options. I think they're good to see in comparison because it's, first of all, easier to see if you look at option 2, the language in context. So it's that particular language is, I think, important to have access to when you're reviewing option 1, which just pulls the language out and makes it very clear and apparent that we're only changing the pronouns and other gender-specific words to be gender neutral. And I would appreciate input and comment on how the thinking about these options. And also you'll see, I wrote just kind of what the ballot proposition could look like, some recommendations we could make to the city council, and maybe it makes sense really to start with that number 1, recommending that we use the gender neutral language, proposed ballot language could be included to the city council to make this easy for them. And then our recommendation that they consider amending the ordinances also to make them gender neutral, and identifying those within a certain date of the report. So I welcome feedback on this document.
Committee comments?
No, I think we should do it. We'll recommend to the council they do it.
Yeah.
It's simple enough. I mean, it's, it clearly isn't, I don't know, word search and replace. I mean, basically, that's what we're doing. And all we have to do, I guess, is agree on what pronouns we're recommending.
Well, that's why I made it so easy. We don't have to agree on pronouns. We can just use language that doesn't use pronouns at all. So it will be good for 50 years in the future.
Right. The only question I would have is this going to be presented as a single unit to the public? Or could it be presented as just a statement, change, make all notifications in here gender neutral? The point is that you go through all of this and hopefully you don't miss one. And it's stuck in the charter, even though you've decided that you want to change all of them, and maybe your search
I'll
and
have a
replace.
double check.
Yeah, your search and replace didn't work, but what you're essentially doing is presenting to the public this long thing.
If we are not required to present any of that to the public, I don't think I don't have a strong need to do that. But I would be surprised if we can just say a blanket statement, we're going to change to gender neutral language, and then not really explain what that's going to look like.
I think you could do that in a statement, though, couldn't you? Just do a ballot, a statement that recommend the change to the city charter, gender neutral language, and these are the pronouns that we'll use or not use, as the case may be, so we don't offend anybody?
Well, there's a lot of repetition if you look at like change his to such members.
Yeah.
We could combine that to.
My point is,
maybe.
you could put that in a statement, a ballot, or a ballot proposition that is the statement that the voter would look at and just say, this is what we're proposing to do, without having to give them the whole charter to read. In other words, are you going to miss anything?
That's option one.
I understand that. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's move on with this, you know?
I actually,
I like it.
I think
Make
that,
this a quick discussion.
yeah, I think the least option one, at least put something out there so people can see the non-offensive language, and you have other means of putting the actual strikeouts so that people can look at it in more in depth. But if you put that many pages in there, I think people are going to be a little bit more confused. And
In where? When you say in there?
On the ballot.
on the ballot, I think if you
Okay.
put down the way that Ms. Wonderly wrote it down, amended with gender neutral language, this is what we mean. Because some of these are not gender neutral. They're actually substituting words like the mayor or the city manager instead of his and her. So we can't really go much more in condensation of it. But I think people are entitled to see the provisions as well.
So, as the election official. So regarding a question, so on the ballot, you have 75 words. And then the backup, which would be like option 1 or 2. And there's also impartial analysis, which like right now we're doing for the cannabis initiative. At the end of his impartial analysis, because we don't want to do 30 pages, we specify that it's going to be on the website. And if any voters would like to get a copy of that ordinance or the charter, we can provide them free of cost. So that's.
Another option, you can actually, in the impartial analysis, refer to the website, or people can request.
And a phone number if they want to print out.
We could have saved a lot of trees over the years if that was, because very often you get these ballot books and they've got the changes, constitutional amendments, things of that nature. And it just goes on forever with strikeouts and I thought that had to be printed and communicated, because not everybody has.
Well, for our charter, Article 27, that we have to provide, because it says there to provide every voter
Yeah.
any analysis related to zoning changes. But like I said, the one we're doing the ordinance right now, there is a provision under the impartial analysis that says that if you would like the full ordinance, contact us and we will provide it to you. So, and that's per election code.
But that's the ordinance. We're talking about the charter change.
Right.
The charter change has to be printed.
Well, right now,
think.
I mean, it's silent, so I'm still
Okay.
reviewing that, but
But you did get that, I was going to ask that question. You did get as far as, because I know that was in question even with Measure E. Could we do that?
yes, we can.
And we are okay with doing that, which is great, because that 39 pages of that
Right,
measure.
because as long as the Article 27 didn't trigger Article 27, then we didn't have to print out we didn't have to print it.
Okay. When you're saying that election code is silent on whether or not we do have to, it's not prescribed.
Right. So we would probably do it for the little ones, like the ones for purchasing, because they're small. But for something like this, again, I mean, I'd have to refer it to the city attorney, but at this point, I would think we could put it on the website and they can go to that. It's up to you. I mean, we can print it also.
It's not up to us.
Well, I mean, it's up to council, right?
It's not even up to them. It's up to the
If we
state law.
are-
Election code, but then you can, you can, if you feel that it's going to give the public more information right there and then it could be done.
So it sounds like does not necessarily have to be
Fine.
fully printed, which I would agree with.
Can't you just use examples like he to such members and for when in each, in like the support of the, because the ballot measure is there. This can be in that supporting documents, right?
Right, that's what this would be.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be all of them.
And that could be in the support, the argument in favor.
Yeah.
When you sent me the proposition material for Proposition D, which we'll be talking about when I get to my section, it actually has the complete language with all the strikeouts there. So, and that's part of the actual proposition that's on the ballot. So I think option 2 will end up being presented there, but I think you're trying to simplify it enough with option 1 so that the members of the public can see that we're not really doing a major overhaul of the charter. But I would move that we adopt this, this report and send it and include it in our report to the council for its November meeting.
Do we have a recommendation? Which one? Which option?
If we can get both options in, I think that would be the best. But I like option 1, probably because I did a little bit more of the digging into the changes to it, but.
I prefer option 1 as well, and I think option 2 offers a good backup, just so people can see the changes in context if we're explaining it to them, or maybe even what's available on the website, because if we can use just an electronic option, so if there's a place people could go, they could see this in context, might be helpful. But option 1, in terms of anything that might get printed, for
Yeah,
sure,
makes sense.
I think.
Sure. I don't think anyone's going to read option 2.
No,
I'm sure you did, the whole thing.
But it would be available.
It would be available.
I think having it available is nice for people who really like to dig in.
And then where does that get pointed out in a particular place that it's available? Does that,
Be the voter information guide,
I think you've got to,
because you have you have to have the impartial analysis.
got to be public.
And then the arguments for and against. will be in
and
there.
rebuttals?
And the rebuttals. So at the bottom of the impartial analysis, the election code states that if you're going to put it on a website, you need to put, there's a comment you have to put on there. It's a paragraph.
You're going to, frankly, I believe you're going to have to print it. It's going to have to get printed.
But we can
In color?
clarify that, yeah.
Clarify.
That, do we need to print this?
Okay, yeah, I will submit something for the city attorney to review.
What I'm asking with my motion is that we include this in the report. And so that we have additional time for the council to figure out how they want to present it to the public.
When do you think you could have that figured out by?
That would have to be up to the city attorney, because we'll put it in. It'll be up to him to do the research.
Okay, and then as an example, I think what I've learned in recent experience is that if there is only an argument in favor, and no argument against is submitted, then there are no rebuttals either. If there's only an argument in favor, I don't think rebuttals are allowed.
What are you going to rebut? Yeah, that makes sense. There's nothing to rebut if there's no.
Well, someone, potentially the argument in favor could be rebutted, but if both an argument in favor and an argument against, if both of those are not submitted, which could be the case here, I mean, someone may come up with an argument against.
But I've seen where there isn't any, and it just makes a statement saying that there are no
rebuttal.
rebuttals or no agreement against.
No arguments against.
Right. and
Yeah,
no
it doesn't
rebuttals.
specify that you have to have rebuttals, but I know that it does specify if only one of the arguments, the direct arguments is submitted, there can be no rebuttals
Not if one submitted at the,
per election code.
yep.
And that could be the case here. So who would end up writing the arguments in favor and arguments against?
City council can do that.
Yep.
Bob can do it.
Anybody can do it.
Both?
You guys can
Anybody,
do it,
council can
yeah.
do it.
I mean, council, the
The
charter. review.
hierarchy on there,
It
in there.
has to be
They
approved by the
assign-
council on the ballot.
In the ballot.
Yeah, anybody can write it, though.
They can write it too.
But they
Yeah,
have
the
a
council
hierarchy in
can
who gets.
assign who, just like for the candidates.
Treasury, yeah.
Right, you were assigned as the against. The same thing, if this is a legislative measure, then it's the legislative would assign who would be writing that argument for.
So the city council would assign the argument against as well. Who writes the argument
I
against?
think that's for volunteers.
They don't have to.
Okay.
Assuming somebody opposes it.
Once it's
Yeah.
published,
That's right.
then
That's
someone,
That's what I'm headed.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, somebody from the
Whatever
public. can-
sexist wants to show up and oppose it, they can.
Exactly.
Because it's a little bit different process that, in Measure E, we had both cases from the front. Okay. So is there anything we need to,
Nicely done.
Public comment, that's the only thing. I think.
but anything to
In the
clarify
next
on,
25 years.
as this is written now,
Run for mayor.
is it in a final stage to submit to city council?
It's final stage, I think, to submit as part of the package of report. We're going to be on a tight deadline to get that report done. So the more pieces that we approve coming into the last meeting, I think it's going to be a lot easier for you as a person who's putting it all together to just say, okay, this has been approved already, slap it in there. So I think it's, at this point, is ready and start to get you thinking about how you want to outline your
The overall report,
This
yeah.
looks quite substantive, complete. It looked really good.
And she did a good job, by the way,
Mr. Chair?
going through all the language. 'Cause it's-
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Solomon.
Thank you. Thanks to member Wonderly and Morocco for putting this together. Definitely support the language that was used and the idea of presenting or including both options. At the last meeting, I have a question, was bandied about a bit as to whether or not to make a recommendation that the language also in the report to city council be adjusted for the city's municipal code. And if that was a consideration of the subcommittee here, or it was considered too overwhelming and to limit it to the city charter.
We actually, that's the second recommendation on there. It's there.
All right, great, thank you.
It says the charter committee recommends the city council amend the city ordinance to make language in the ordinance gender neutral, and it suggests and recommends a timetable to do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Just wondering, do we want to correct the English in it or just leave it as is? For example, it says the charter committee recommends that the charter be amended to used gender neutral language.
No, it's just used to me. Used.
Should be to use.
Yeah, that's what it says.
Says used with a D.
Where?
On the first sentence.
Sorry, above.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the actual proposition.
Yes, we can change that.
Okay.
I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
Sure.
Okay.
We just need public comment, I think.
Yeah, anyone from the public wishing to speak?
I was going to say, I know there's some ways that can be implemented, but I was just doing a quick Google search thinking how many other cities have already made changes, like San Diego, Oakland, Berkeley, Boston, Portland, Oregon, and actually a bunch of other cities too. Why don't we check and see how they did it, rather than give it, like you said, if it's just a few words, and I think the recommendations make sense. Let's see how they did it, so you don't have to send a gigantic packet out to the voters. It seems like it could just be, we're changing these words. It seems like it should be straightforward, but I would say check on those other cities and see how they did it, because obviously they made that change prior to what we did. Maybe they did it in a simplified way that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, Stephen Deals, District 4. So to the question, do we need to print this? I think the answer to that is going to be the same for every one of your changes, regardless of this topic or any. So the correct answer to that will apply to every one of the items you're looking at. And my suspicion is, yes, you'll have to print it. So.
Yeah, the question of do we need to would be universal. The question, if we don't need to, would we want to?
Right.
In any rate, is I think where we're at right now.
Is that our call?
We can make that recommendation, which we've done here.
You cannot make an assumption that everyone has access to a website.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Well, we just have with Measure E.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be printed.
You what?
It'll be printed.
Okay.
Sent out.
All right. Motion is to what then? Who's making a motion?
I made the motion to adopt this report as part of our overall report to the Redondo Beach City Council
I would second that motion.
with the spelling check change that.
Okay. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Oh, there was no Zoom or E. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Committee Member Solomon, was that a
You voted
yea or
yes.
nay?
I voted yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's a yes.
I forgot to ask for Zoom or E comments. Okay,
That's unanimous.
righty. Thank you,
Nice work.
Ms. Wonderly and Mr. Morocco. That's great work. Get back to my agenda. Moving on to section J, items for discussion prior to action, new items. J1, discussion and possible action regarding the following articles related to enumeration and terms. Article 11, section 6, Article 8, section 8, Article 10, section 10. Committee member, Mr. Morocco.
On this one, we have a lot of things that are probably going to be more important to discuss, so I move that we table this to the next meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, moving on to J2 then. Discussion and possible action regarding Article 15, appointed boards and commissions repealed by election on March 4th, 1997. Again, Member Morocco.
Okay, so on this one, if you look at page 296 of your packet, I actually am going to briefly go through, because I know we're getting late on time, with regards to, I think what's needed as a change in our charter back to the way it was previously. So we have had, and I appreciate Mr. Pinsler's ballot propositions for changing it. We've traditionally had charter commissions and ordinance commissions. And charter commissions, for example, in the 1935 charter was the Planning Commission. And in the 1949 charter, it was the Public Planning, Recreation, Library, Taxation and Budget, Public Improvements, and Parks. And in 1997, we ended up having Proposition D, and what it ended up doing was taking everything out of Article 15 and putting it in an ordinance. And the stated purpose, which is in the ballot argument, is that the council needed the ability to combine or disband or create new commissions. We've always had ordinance commissions. I serve on the Historical Commission, which was set up in the 1960s, but it's not a charter commission. So what ended up happening is Proposition D ended up passing, and Article 15, with the exception of the introduction, was completely gutted and put it into an ordinance, and that's kind of where we sit now. And what they ended up adopting is Title II, Administration, Chapter 9, Boards and Commissions, Article 1's Uniform Regulations, which had the context of the previous charter, Article 15. And so if you look at the actual municipal court, Article 2 starts with the Historical Commission, and it deals with Article 14, Public Arts Commission, and has their powers of duty. So what the flexibility that the council and the city was looking for by having the ability to merge, create new commissions based on need, get things, that was all taken care of with that charter amendment back in 1997. But what I've noticed recently is that we may need to put something back in the charter that deals with how we go about removing people. The standards for appointment is in the municipal code. We have district representatives, kind of like some of us are on this panel. We have at-large representative. We have people on commissions that have special qualifications, such as on the Planning Commission, you have to have like a certain background on certain things. And so the appointment process, as it is now, is that the mayor ends up making a recommendation, you get 4 votes of the council, and that person is ratified and then gets put onto the actual commission. Now, the standard for removal is actually a more interesting process. So built into the ordinance, and it used to be in the charter, so nothing's really changed on that. It was 15.8, that if you're not in attendance for 60 days since the last meeting and you don't get permission from the city council to miss a meeting, you can have your position vacated. If you're involved in the crime involving moral turpitude, you can be removed from the commission. If you cease to be a resident or vote of Redondo Beach, you can be removed. And if the commission itself is disbanded, then you're also removed. But back in October, there was a new provision that was added, and actually I mentioned this the first time I came through, is it seems to create an ambiguity in our municipal code, because right now, and the materials you do have, 9.107 talks about some of the same things that we had previous in the charter. You're 60 days, you're not a resident, you're moral turpitude kind of crime, you get removed and the council takes care of. But what they did adopt in 2021 was that the majority can vote out the people that have been appointed. And so what I think is a problem is that at that point, you have somebody who's voted in with 4 votes, voted out with 3 votes, and at the same time, you don't have any standard for it. So you may have a situation where somebody's been serving on a commission for a number of years and ultimately, and they're doing good work, and ultimately there's a motion to remove them from the commission. They may or may not get notice. It may or may not be stated in the agenda that that's what's happening. And so we saw that happen at one of the meetings where 2 planning commissioner members were removed, but there was a vote to remove a public arts commissioner that just came out of the blue. No clear reason was stated on the record. It ended up that person was removed, but the mayor ended up vetoing it. Then there was another public arts person that was also being proposed. And if you listen to the minutes, the mayor said he's going to veto again, so that never happened. So I'm looking at this as an accountability thing with regards to, we need to have something in the overriding process. We are dealing with our citizens who are volunteering in their time, and at a minimum, they should be given some sort of notice that they're up for removal. So what I am proposing we throw back into the charter would be section 15.8 that basically reinstates that the council may remove a commissioner for cause if they're absent from a meeting, convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, they're not a resident anymore, or in its discretion, if the council gives at least 1 week notice to the commissioner that they will be the subject of removal in an agendized item, and that any motion or resolution removing a commissioner must state the reason for that removal. That actually comes out of the 1934 charter. I think that would prevent abuses. And again, since it does require 4 votes to put them on the commission, it should require 4 votes to take them off the commission. So that's the reasons that I'm suggesting that we need to add this back in the charter to at least make sure that our citizens at least have some accountability and know what's going to happen with regards to if they volunteer and spend a lot of time working on a commission. So that's my presentation on it.
Just to clarify, I don't think it requires a 4th.
That was 3.
It's only 3 to.
It's just a majority.
To become a council, to
Yeah.
become a commissioner.
Okay, well, it was in the previous charters, it was 4, so.
It's now 3.
Okay, so 3. So I don't have a problem then removing that request in there. But I think that's And we have an inconsistent provision in the charter right now, which is 109 and 107. So,
Mr. Solomon, I want to call, in case you're there, to call on you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of comments. I agree. It only requires 3 votes to appoint somebody to commission. The mayor makes recommendations and that person is approved or not approved by the city council. We've gotten into a number of arguments over the last few years where the mayor had commission appointments that he wanted to make that were not approved. And we began a series of political fights, the result of which is, I think, what we saw with the ordinance change. Then you had other members of the council, or members of the council, despite not being empowered to appoint people to the commissions, and Mr. Webb would point this out, that were making recommendations, say, well, our motions appointing people to the commission, despite the fact that it was not within their power. There are a number of instances over the last few years where commission members are serving despite not being appointed because they were not approved for a second term by the majority on the city council. And there was difficulties and discussions about that. And the city attorney came in and said, those people begin to serve or continue to serve until replaced. So you had a number of commissioners, and even still, I believe, have a number of commissioners that are serving with an asterisk next to their name, where they were not approved by the majority of the council and they were not replaced, so they cannot come to an agreement. So all of these things that Mr. Morocco is talking about, I understand and appreciate. I don't think it's unfair to say that a person should be presented with the idea of why perhaps they're being replaced. But I would suggest that the fluidity that was necessary for removing this from the charter, to give the staff, to give the city council some flexibility, these things should not be put back into the charter. If you wanted to make a recommendation that it be added to the ordinances, that some hearings would be held if a person was removed or modifying the ordinance, I would be willing to discuss that. I think it's a worthwhile discussion. There are other parts of our ordinances for the boards and commissions. We have in our Harbor Commission ordinance that a person be a member of an organization that no longer exists. It's a peer and lease association, and that organization doesn't exist anymore. There's a lot of cleanup that's necessary within our boards and commissions. There, at one of the most recent city council meetings, a discussion about creating or modifying the boards and commissions. But I don't think any part of this should be put back into the charter to maintain the flexibility. I think that was well noted. I understand where Mr. Morocco is coming from. This is a political process. To quote Mr. DeWoodziak, everything is political. It'd be willing to discuss the idea of providing a hearing, but would be opposed to the idea of moving some of this back into the charter. Thank you.
Mr. Pinsler.
I would agree with Gene about that. I mean, part of the reason for taking all this stuff out of the charter was that it created, it was a minefield in a lot of ways in terms of things that are in the charter have precedence over ordinances. So the idea of taking this out and putting it into the ordinance structure puts it as not just a political event, but a public event. This has to be done in public. So I don't think it's necessary to put into the charter strictures like this. I think it's up to the council, and any council can do this. I mean, Gene was right. There are people who are serving on there because a group of people can filibuster if they want to. And they can filibuster, and a person can stay on a commission for 2 to 4 years. as long as that filibuster can hold, to stay on a point of commission that they were supposed to retire from. In some cases, it would go beyond 2 terms, which is a limitation that we have put on everybody else. But if nobody replaces you, you stay on. You can stay on for 3 terms. If you stay on for 4 terms, if no one replaces you. So I think that this is a thing best handled in either an ordinance or a resolution structured by the council, rather than placing it back into the charter.
Be clear, we're only talking about 15.8 here?
15.8. And I would.
So can I ask a question then? How do you envision 15.8 affecting everything else that was removed?
Okay, so I envision going back to the ballot proposition that actually brought it up.
Okay.
And the reason set out in the ballot proposition is that the council needed the flexibility to merge, to create new things. So it's dealing more with the structure rather than the people. So if the council said, you know, hey, these 2 commissions are the same, like Parks and, they had a Recreation and a Parks Commission, we want to merge it, that changes and the people are removed because the council has changed it. So I'm only looking at what kind of due process is the person who's being removed, are they going to even be notified? And if the way it's structured now, the person, I agree with Mr. Penzler that you shouldn't be there for eons and eons, but at the same time, if you are actually, Mr. Solomon spent, hours and hours reviewing the budget stuff and the reports that have come out. I would think that he would want at least some sort of advance notice that he was being removed from a commission at the time, so that he can either come to the council and explain why he should still be in there, or at least have a reason stated on the minutes as to why he's being removed, and not just because he's in the wrong political faction at the time. It shouldn't be an arbitrary process, because you're dealing with your citizenship, and it's an accountability thing.
I couldn't agree more. It shouldn't be arbitrary. I only want to know is if we put 15.8 back in there. And do you have recommended verbiage, by the way?
I do, and
Well, I need to see that before I make some comments.
the council may remove a commissioner for cause if such commissioner is 1, absent from a commission meeting for 60 consecutive days without the approval of the council, 2, has committed a crime involving moral turpitude, 3, is no longer a resident, what they call elector, that's coming out of the previous charters, and then adding to it, or in its discretion, taking into account what Mr. Solomon said, and what Mr. Penzler said, the council can remove in discretion, provided that the city council gives at least 1 week notice to the commissioner that they will be the subject matter of a removal action that's agendized, and that any motion or resolution removing a commissioner must state the reason for such removal. So it's just basically saying you can remove the people if you want to, just tell the person that you're removing them, give them a chance to show up if they want to, and put the reason that you're removing them as part of the record. And that actually came out of the 1934 charter, that they used to do that. So that's all I'm.
We're working on a 47 charter, though.
49 charter, yeah.
Yeah, 40.
Yeah, we're working our way through that.
But the 49 charter had all the first part. I'm just adding the discretionary part, which is consistent with what the council has done, is they want the discretion to remove people. And that's.
Questions on the other end?
I have a question. First of all, you say one week notice. If something is agendized, they have at least 5 days notice. So what you're saying is to add 2 days.
Well, what I'm saying is when it shows up on the agenda, it shows up on the item P mayor and council thing, and it talks about, it's just a general removal of, and that's what they did in this last go around, and is this removal of commissioner. Doesn't say who the person is, doesn't give that person notice that it's happening at that point in time. And I'm trying to get something so that they at least know that they're the subject, because when you have somebody do a substitute amendment and say, oh, we should also remove this person who has nothing to do with anything other than just because they want that person, arbitrarily pull somebody out.
So what about this, you're talking about removal.
Yes, only removal.
So let's say, hypothetical, I served my 2 terms and no one decided to run for the seat. The charter says I would still be a council member because there's no one to replace me. I could have stayed more than 2 terms.
I think that's what Mr. Cadre was
I
trying
think we
to
had
do
this
at one
argument
point.
30 years ago.
I'm sorry?
I think we had this argument.
I
30
know we
years
did.
ago.
But,
so you know.
but if you wanted to remove people, people should be removed after 2 terms. It should end.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that either.
But why would that be a recommendation for an ordinance?
He's talking about due process here.
I'm talking about if the council is not going to make the due process as part of an ordinance, it needs to go into the Constitution. That's why our California Constitution has so many amendments.
But let me ask you a different question. The council is going to have to approve putting this on the ballot.
That's the key.
Yeah.
So if they're going to vote to put it on the ballot, they would, I assume, wish to have it happen. My guess.
Yeah.
Or else they would vote against it.
That makes sense.
So if that's the case, they could just do that as an ordinance, and we don't have to go through the process of putting it into the charter.
But an ordinance isn't required to stay around. The next council can come and get rid of that. I guess the question here is, when you have, this is not the whole big thing of should we have flexibility in commissions or not? I think that was already decided. The idea is, should you just give people who have offered to serve on a commission some notice if they're going to be removed? To me, that's the only question we're asking. Should we give them notice if they're going to be removed?
But I think
And
Mr.
should that
Pinsler,
be in the charter?
yeah, Mr. Pinsler makes a,
Required
understood.
versus at the whim of whatever city council happens to be there at the moment.
So I follow Mr. Pinsler's thought process is that if they would go so far as to say, yes, we want to put this on a charter amendment and city council does that, absolutely, they would do it as an ordinance. And I think you stand a better chance as doing it as an ordinance modification rather than, because if they're not going to do an ordinance modification, I would bet they're not going to do a charter, put it on a ballot as a charter change. And that's their decision.
And again, to answer your other question about another council coming across and changing it, this is a political process.
Yeah, it's like the wholesale change. When a new president comes in, the whole world changes at the federal level.
So I'm not sure of the status of commissioners like our status, but while we're sitting here, are we considered city employees? No.
Volunteers.
Well, I meant, so, if there's I guess, an employee-employer relationship, then you do have an ordinance or something, but the other one is at will. In other words, we're here at will.
We are here at will.
Okay. so-
We are here
And that
at
goes,
will
well, that goes,
tonight.
that goes for everybody though.
We're here at their will.
Yeah, and it,
Well, that's really what I meant.
it is,
Council's will.
Yes.
and what council wrote is they could remove any one of us.
Anyone.
Exactly.
And I think I believe in that.
The question is, should you get notice that you're being removed?
Well, the question is whether or not the notice should be in the
Charter.
charter.
Yes.
Is that?
That's the question.
That's the question. The question isn't whether or not they should get notice, because I think they should, but does that belong in the charter?
Well, I do think as one of those who couldn't get on a commission for many years and finally did when the wind shifted, I don't think that's fixable, but I think the specific one of removing someone without due process is certainly, a charter would supersede anything else. It couldn't be overruled. So yeah, I would agree that should be in there.
I'm not opposed to it being in there. I just think it kind of mucks it up.
It might not get in there because it is.
Well,
Yeah, but I think it's worth a try.
Let's just say, for argument's sake, all of these changes are presented to people, the people of the city, and they say, I don't want any of these changes.
I guess you have to go out and pitch for what you want.
I
kinda doing that.
understand that, but this is one of those pieces that could frankly be easily handled by the council. Now, the 1 week notification or I'm not sure, and I understand the situation you were talking about, but I'm not sure that the people who were involved in those changes weren't in fact notified.
They weren't. I can tell you from listening to that meeting that the names came out of the blue when Mayor Brand vetoed one of them. He pulled out a name for another person from that same commission. So, and if you listen to the meeting, you will see that there was a hesitancy on him trying to go figure out who should be removed from it. And that person was surprised. The other two from planning, the planning and harbor and budget and finance are the major commissions in the city. And that I can understand the political stuff, but public arts is not one of those.
No.
It's an advisory kind of commission, and people serve because they love public art.
Planning and Harbor have a different status.
Yeah, and it had a different rule going into, and I actually researched the rule. It was the only one that had that at will provision. Everything else was up until they did that change and added section 109, it was ultimately you have to do moral turpitude, not a resident, or the 60 days.
Oh, moral turpitude is one of those things, you ask somebody to define it and they won't tell you.
But it's a crime. They said if
It is not definable.
When we see it.
Yeah, we know when we see it.
if you're convicted, it said if you're convicted of a crime. But the way I
No, it's
read,
not.
No.
That's what
Convicted
it's-
of crime
No,
with moral
that's
turpitude.
not what moral
No,
turpitude
Moral
it's a special kind of crime.
Special kind of crime.
okay,
That offends.
That people wouldn't
it
approve
offends
of.
the community, whatever that means.
Yeah. Some crime is okay.
convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude.
That's right.
That's what it says there.
But define what moral
What is moral
turpitude is.
turpitude? It's an old term.
Mr. Solomon?
But
Hang on just a second.
Yeah,
Mr.
I
Solomon?
think that we tread on dangerous ground when we seek to establish some sort of procedure or due process on an ad hoc basis here. What does, as was just alluded to, what does due process mean? Is it 1 week? Is that fair? Does the person have a chance? Must they appear? You're putting something into the city charter, creation of due process that's really defined more broadly by the state constitution or other case law and things like that. The more you try and officiate, the more you try and seek to remedy specific issues like this. I think what we have here is, I'm not saying that this is not directed for you, Mr. Morocco, is political grievance is not uncommon within the city council. And of course, the appointments and boards are not
Tear out the front
political
page.
process by design. There's no question about that. But this is one of the powers that the mayor has, is to appoint people. And it's one of his big powers. And it's been bandied about as to whether or not, since the city council approves it anyway, whether or not that should remain one of the mayor's powers. But I think all of these things should be hashed out by the city council and the majorities as the political winds change. I do agree that it's a worthwhile discussion and should be had at city council to clean up a person's rights or responsibilities or their abilities to challenge these things, like we have when you try to appeal a decision by the planning commission. Should there be an appeal process for somebody? Do we put that into the city charter as part of the due process? What that looks like as just a generic term, I think is difficult to put into the charter because it's not defined. And then if you try and define it, how do you modify it? You have to modify it by charter. So I would stand on the idea that I think it's a worthwhile idea, but not something for the charter.
So I'm an attorney, Mr. Solomon, and due process actually has some meaning to me. And I actually personally think, although this is, nothing that I'm sharing with any of the people that have been removed, I think that if once you're appointed and the term says 4 years, I think you have a vested right to be in that position under reasonable circumstances. And I don't have a problem with the council removing people, but I think you have at that point a right to know that you're being removed and a right to address the council with regards to it before you are removed. So that's the only part I'm saying. Council can remove whoever they want to, as long as they notify them and tell them the reason why they're being removed. I think that any citizen in the city that volunteers to serve in the community has a right to know that this is what's happening. And we're our community, and I think that's just an important part of it.
Yeah, and also, I don't
I
think
think that's
it's not
very
about
fair.
due process, though, it's about fairness. And due process isn't in the language anywhere. It just says it's fair that they know they're gonna be removed. And can talk up. I don't see that as so controversial.
And I agree with you, Mr. Morocco. I think that's a fair analysis of, my only disagreement is whether or not that's a charter amendment.
Yeah, right. I would agree with that.
I'm with that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a charter.
Not a charter.
Any members of the public wish to speak on this?
Good evening, Commissioners. I would like to, I think I agree with the last comments that were just made with regard to, I don't know if it's necessarily arrives at a charter level, but it's certainly, in a matter of fairness, I think that's okay. But I would like to clarify one other point. I know the one example that Mr. Morocco was giving was specific to Mayor Brand, but I think we need to go not too much further back. In 2017, Mayor Aspel unilaterally removed a person on the, I think it was Public Safety Commission. It was in 2017, and the reason I know that to be a fact because the individual was very upset about it. He was polled, and he was saying, it was told that he was polled because he was in support of Measure C. Mayor Aspel had just lost the election. It was April of 2017 where the person was polled, wasn't notified, and then after Mayor Brown was sworn in, he was reappointed. So it's in the minutes, and I talked to the individual when this happened in real time, and Mayor Rand had told me that's why he reappointed him. So at any rate, not necessarily saying that it was the right thing, for the either party, but again, going forward, I don't know if this arises to a charter level. It's certainly something I think that the council can, it is agendized, and so as Mr. Pinsler said, the public is notified at least 5 days in advance already. So I don't know if it's really accomplishing much more than what we really kind of have informally now. So at any rate, I think it's good to be fair, but I don't know if we're really accomplishing something different than what we have. We're giving 2 more days by making a huge amendment to the charter, which I don't think is necessary. Thanks.
If I can just briefly say, the person who was moved from public safety to library in March of 2017 and then back to public safety in April by the different mayors, I actually talked to him. His name is Ben Morse, and he didn't know what was going on with that. And I asked Ms. Manzano as well about what was going on, because the minutes don't say much about it. The agenda packets mention it briefly. I talked to Lisa Capenzi, who was the one who actually brought it to my attention. And I tried to find out why he was moved, and he didn't know why he was moved. And all I know is that he was moved unanimously from one and approved for the same thing the next month unanimously as well. That's all I got out of the minutes. But
Any Zoom or e-comments? Okay. Is there a motion on this item?
I move that we adopt it.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Let's do a roll call vote on this one. Good.
No.
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 Aye.
Committee Member Wonderly
No.
and Chair Strasburg.
And Ms. Morocco.
Oh,
You don't get one.
sorry.
He only.
I'll be an aye.
Member Morocco.
Imagine that.
Missed him. Okay. And then, I said Chair Strasburg.
No.
Okay, so that's it. 2.
Fails 5-2? Okay. So with that, I believe that's the end of that one.
Yes, and I thank you for
And I
the
appreciate your time and
consideration.
looking into it, and the consideration is great.
I appreciate you considering it. Thank you.
Very good. Moving on to item J3, discussion and possible action regarding Article 11, Section 11, City Clerk, and Section 11.1, City Treasurer. Mr. Pinsler.
Steve, we finally got to it, it's okay. This issue is associated but not necessarily reliant upon whether or not the city clerk and the city treasurer are elected or not. That's as opposed to the city attorney, there are many cities that elect either or both of these, and it's a point of that we can discuss one way or the other regarding electability. The issue regarding the city clerk is those elements of the requirements of the city clerk's position that historically has been placed in the charter, and whether or not it really has any effect anymore. And if you look in Section 11 under the city charter, after subsection E, all those things have to do with the finances. And in fact, that really doesn't, well, it's an historical art, it's another historical artifact. This one particularly had to do with, in part, the city clerk of previous eras wanting to justify their positions, and including the 15 units of accounting that were needed for a city clerk in that position. But the ways the cities have changed in terms of how they handle finances, it should not be in the city clerk's role to be doing all of these things, maintaining a general accounting system, maintaining inventories of real and personal property. All of the things that should be under the city manager and the finance director's purview. So my recommendation, whether or not city clerk is an elected or not, that's I think a separate issue, that everything past subsection E should be removed from the charter. Now, as opposed to the city treasurer, the only issue regarding that is whether it's full-time or not. And in fact, at this point, it is not. But it's not in the charter. And if it is going to be a part-time position, which perhaps it should be because of the way that the department is structured, placing it as a part-time position removes the ability, it makes it specific as to what time sink the responsibility of that person should be. So those are the two things regarding clerk and treasurer. And again, we can discuss whether to be elected or not as a separate issue. I think these are structural issues that I would like to see changed. Any comments?
What specifically would you change?
But what I would change,
Strikeouts.
I'm sorry?
Strikeouts.
Strike out everything on city clerk after E,
After.
everything under F. Charge of the administration of the financial affairs of the city. It truly does not belong,
Beginning with F.
beginning with F. F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of that should be removed. It really does not represent the way that cities operate these days. Nor is it the city clerk's expertise or role. Shouldn't be, at least in my view. City clerks are exactly what the title says. They're responsible for records, they're responsible for maintaining ordinances. They do all of the things that a clerk ought to do as opposed to being in the finance department. With the city treasurer, everything that the city treasurer that's listed here, the question is whether this should be a part-time or a full-time position. And nowhere in here does it say one way or the other. And if it's going to be part-time, we should state it's part-time. If it's going to be full-time, we should state it's full-time. And that should
Talking
be
about the treasurer.
the treasurer.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Solomon.
So in 2014, and thanks to Treasurer Deals for coming tonight, there was Measure CT, which changed the treasurer's role from full-time to part-time. Referring back to the Moss Adams report, which was done at the behest, and thankfully at the behest of the city treasurer, in their report, there is a recommendation or discussion. So we're lucky to have Ms. Manzano as a unicorn for all of the skills and abilities that she has. But we may not be so lucky if one day she decides no longer run for elected office. And some of the additional requirements, as Mr. Pinsler pointed out, would provide a hurdle perhaps to an otherwise very qualified person to fulfill that role. In contrast, our city treasurer's position, the charter does not lay out any requirements beyond the residency requirements and some minor requirements there for any level of skill or training or ability to become the city treasurer. So if we're going to amend these things and retain the role of a part-time city treasurer, I would perhaps suggest reducing some of the requirements for the city clerk, or perhaps adding some skill level requirements for the city treasurer as they hold an oversight role. The Moss Adams report, I'll read from that if I may please. City charter assigns fiduciary roles and responsibilities to the clerk and treasurer, although there are some functional overlaps with activities that have been informally delegated to the city manager and city finance department. The overlap includes two significant abnormalities. This is from the Moss Adams report. The charter assigns the clerk duties encompassing expenditure functions and requires officers to have financial management, education experience, to Mr. Pinsler's point. The treasurer is a separate elected office rather than a function performed by a chief financial officer. So this professional organization that was retained to review our roles and responsibilities seems to be suggesting here that we no longer have these strict financial management, education, experience responsibilities, and perhaps that we formalize the functions performed by the treasurer's office to be, those things have been moved to the city finance director to be formalized. There are arguments what the city treasurer's oversight roles are. The city treasurer no longer oversees our investments. We have a firm that does that. I shouldn't say he doesn't oversee it because he's responsible and is in constant communication with our investment company. But the city treasurer no longer, like most other cities, handles the investments itself. Annual audits of city investments and financials are conducted by outside firms. When the city treasurer's role went to be a part-time role, it delegated many of those roles and responsibilities. So those things perhaps should be addressed in our discussions as clarifying what those roles and responsibilities are. It's essentially an oversight role. It's not as tactical as it used to be. And as far as the state clerk is concerned, as I said, between the analysis from Moss Adams and the difficulties to overcome to find a qualified person like Ms. Manzano in the future might otherwise be difficult. So to consider perhaps Mr. Pinsler's recommendations there about the qualifications and clarifying the rules. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any members of the public?
Okay, so we, as the city treasurer, we invoked the Moss Adams group to come in and take a look specifically at the charter requirements for the city treasurer's office. And then the city clerk was wanting to look at her roles and responsibilities as well. And then the city manager did too. So we had an idea to have some oversight and some review. When I undertook Measure CT, I had decided to very narrowly scope my reforms. And what was a requirement for the position at the time was that it be full-time. So I elected to ask the voters to remove the full-time requirement. I like it that way. It's not specifically full-time nor part-time, but at the same time, we reduced the salary over actually 2 salary reductions from 152,000 down to 25,000. So the pay is essentially part-time, but if somebody wants to work full-time, they can. So I don't look at the treasurer role as my job. I look at it as the treasurer role. And the treasurer role can change with a new treasurer, and there's enough latitude to do that. A new treasurer can work more, can work within the scope of the city charter responsibilities and focus on some things over others. I chose to do the reforms I did because I felt we could get more bang for our buck, and we do a tremendous job for the amount of money we spend. I think, as was stated, that the role of the treasurer is oversight, investing, and auditing. The treasurer office used to have a full-time auditor, and that position went away over time when there was some reform of the position between the prior treasurer and the city manager. So I think auditing is important. There are designated responsibilities for the treasurer in the charter that are undertaken now by the finance department. And I think those are designations that should be changed. May I have extra time?
He doesn't,
So moved.
yeah, he doesn't do speaker time. Yeah.
Yeah,
don't
that
get
thing's
a
really
time.
distracting. I went from green to yellow. I'm afraid I'm gonna get red soon. So,
There are lots of people waiting to talk.
Land the plane here.
so there are opportunities. So you all are undertaking some really heavy lifting, long overdue. So it's really great. I have some concerns about what you're doing with respect to how it will be presented to the voters. And the question that came up before by Mr. Morocco and Dawidziak, comments about maybe changing the appearance of the amount of democracy that's being presented through these charter changes. And also the amount of bite that you're giving people all at once. So I fear for what you're doing that you could potentially do a lot of heavy lifting, do a lot of great work that people would agree with, but potentially have some poison pill in here that could throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. So I don't know. It's up to you guys to figure out if you're going to present this in pieces or you want to do the whole omnibus choice. I think it's going to be interesting. But I would support any realignment that within the treasurer's role that parses out tasks that are currently done by the finance department and have been for prior to my tenure. So I would support that. And I have some differences with what Commissioner Solomon, committee member Solomon was stating, some overlap and agreement with him. But I would support changes that more accurately reflect the role of the current role of the treasurer and potential future role of the treasurer. And then I kind of like leaving the ambiguity of full-time, part-time, because a future treasurer can work as much as they want and not be restricted to part-time. Those are my comments. I'm open for questions. Yes, sir.
When I look at the city treasurer part, it seems like it would make more sense to call it the chief internal auditor of the city, because it seems like the finance director does a lot of the stuff. We have budget and finance that's doing it. You have the city clerk who's doing it, but you're really more of the independent inside person that's making sure that the whole system works. Is that
I
a fair
think that's an
assessment?
accurate role, but I wouldn't change the name of the office. But yeah, that's an accurate role of the treasurer's office, one of the roles.
Right.
Yes.
Actually, in some cities, there is a separate comptroller who's generally responsible for audits and that kind of investigation. And then there is a treasurer. They are separate in many larger cities, not necessarily a place like here. But the issue that I was getting at wasn't, if you leave this ambiguous, there's a way that the city manager and the city departments work with the treasurer's office. And that person who is their normal work through with a part-time supervisor, if you want to call it that, suddenly gets changed to be a full-time person, that dynamic changes. And the object of the charter is to keep that from happening. If there is a statement that this is a part-time position, the lines of communications and the lines of responsibility are set. And I think that is important when you're setting a structural document like this. It shouldn't be at the whim of whether a person wants to be full-time and get paid $25,000, and that's fine by them. I mean, if you wish to, you could show up as many hours as you wanted to. But the question is whose responsibility, who is, in fact, the operational structure of that department is now focused on your deputy as opposed to yourself, because you are in fact part-time. Now, whether you do it or not, that's a personal thing as opposed to a structural thing. What I'm trying to set here is when a person comes into this office, the next one who comes in, they should know what it is that the city wants them to do. Does the city want them to be part-time, or does the city want them to be full-time or be flexible? My feeling is that it's the responsibility of a document like this to say what it wants that department to do. That's why I'm saying it should state whether it's part-time or full-time.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes, thank you, Chair Strutzenberg. I'd like to take this moment of kumbaya, Mr. Deals, and say thank you for those parts of what we agreed to. So I appreciate that. There are elements of the city treasurer's role, like other roles within the city, have evolved over time. We've gone from a full-time city treasurer with a rather extensive staff to a part-time city treasurer with part-time and a deputy who is full-time, who is able to handle a lot of those roles. So this is just a natural evolution of the position to see where we go next. If we want to go back to full-time, or we're comfortable with the part-time, or we want to have simply an appointed city treasurer and then the full-time employee who's the deputy performing most of the functions, or do we just want to have a deputy and not have a city treasurer, just have the deputy? I can say that I've read through a number of white papers that reveal the idea behind having an appointed or hired city treasurer yields better investment returns overall than a person who is elected. And I think part of that points back to not all city treasurers who are elected have perhaps a fluency or skill in all variety of investments or all variety of the functions necessary with the job. Since there aren't any performance metrics in order to qualify for the position, you might have a complete novice there, which is why I think that the white papers have revealed having a hired or appointed person yields better results overall. I would think that it's just simply the next evolution of the role, that we put it to the voters to decide whether or not they wish to continue along with the role of having an elected city attorney. We haven't had that put to them in some time. It might be the next evolution, but to the point that's been made a number of times by members of the committee, it is important to know what the voters want. And so I would support or posit the idea that as the next evolution might be to simply have a hired city attorney, as we do with our deputy, and perhaps no longer have an elected city attorney, that might be something for the voters to decide next after deciding 2-1. And it was a well-done campaign, Mr. Deals, to have the part-time one in 2014.
I think you mean city treasurer, not city attorney in this discussion.
I beg your pardon, city treasurer, thank you. Yeah. I'll Freudian slip, I
Tomorrow's
apologize.
discussion.
Well, interestingly enough, in my last election, my opponent, his position was to eliminate the position of the city treasurer. And so that was presented.
That was me.
To the, that was presented
That
to
was
the
me,
voters. And the voters really overwhelmingly selected the elected position over the position of eliminating the city treasurer, which is why I really keyed into Mr. Dawidziak's point about potentially having your work overwhelmed by suggesting to the voters that you're reducing their democratic choices within the city of Redondo Beach. So I think there's plenty of evidence that that's probably not the better way to go. But if you do decide to do this and the council agrees, that you probably want to put it on a separate item and not mess with all the other work that you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Morocco?
I had a question. So your compensation is now fixed by ordinance at 25,000?
Correct.
So when Mr. Pinsler talks about full-time versus part-time, your salary compensation kind of is clear that you're not expected to be working the same amount of hours as everybody else. So how does that ordinance play out with what you're doing?
Well, it's really interesting because when I went through this process, because of the timing of the ordinance, with respect to the timing of the election, I had to lobby to have, I was the treasurer at the time, the full-time treasurer, and I was working full-time as the treasurer, to have my salary reduced, or the treasurer's salary reduced to this $25,000 figure. And then I ran to become treasurer. I would be taking on that new reduced salary if I won, but also I hadn't gotten the charter changed to change it from full-time to part-time. So the salary was fixed now by the decision of the council and by ordinance. And then I just had to hope that the voters would agree with my charter change so that I wouldn't be forced to work full-time at $25,000. So I took that risk, and fortunately it worked out. So I'm familiar with it. But if somebody wants the charter changed to be, well, actually, if somebody wants the position to be full-time and they lobby the city council for the higher salary, that could happen at the next election time. I would give a little more historical context that this position was originally part-time. So it was part-time, and then some political manifestations, I don't know, kind of alluded to by Mr. Pinsler, made it full-time, and then a big salary came with it.
Right.
And then there was a COLA that went with it. And then it just really got way up there. And so when I was on the city council, we actually reduced that salary. And then when I was city treasurer, we got it down even further. So I see it as a part-time position, but I wouldn't want to restrict. I mean, I see it for me, the way I work it, the way my management style is. It works part-time well for me, but I wouldn't want to restrict a future treasurer to that. So they might have different ideas.
Any other members?
I just want to make clear that the discussion here has nothing to do with electing or appointing. This is really about the structure of the department as much as anything. It could be either appointed or elected. It doesn't really matter. To me, the question was from a workflow, or from a structural point of view, should the department know who's in charge in terms of day-to-day operation? Because if you are in fact part-time, you may very well be a administrator in absentia. And that would create more difficulty if someone comes along and says, okay, I'm changing that, I'm going to be full-time. Suddenly it changes the department structure. A deputy who was in charge of things and was hired to be in charge of things suddenly gets superseded by someone who decides they're going to be in charge of things, may leave. And the actual department operation, as you well know, the deputy is a key person. The person under you in the flow chart is a key person. And it's a key person to other departments. The change in that is not something I think from a business structure perspective is a good thing. And that's why I want to put something in here that makes it specific.
It sounds like your underlying premise, if I get this right, is regardless of whether it's elected or appointed,
Right.
this is roles and responsibility
responsibility.
definition that
Right.
you want to address
That's
here.
exactly right.
Okay.
So your point about whether or not it'll be rejected because of democracy or whatever.
Independent of that.
Yeah, this is independent of that. There's something wrong with that lack of specificity.
Okay.
I support clarification of roles and responsibilities. So if you guys want to.
I think that's our goal here. Any Zoom or e-comments?
Well, I'd like to speak
Yes.
on the city clerk part. So the city treasurer is responsible for the revenues, and the city clerk is oversight for the expenditures. And I mean, I understand in a sense of provided to, what the qualifications to run for city clerk. And I just happen to have both, which is the governmental and the classes. But the thing is, being city clerk for the last 15 years, the checks and balance. So like, for instance, the demands. I go through the bills, sometimes I have my employees go through the bills, and we find errors. So by the time it gets to us, which we shouldn't have any errors, right? Because it's gone through the department head, accounting, and then it comes to me. And so, so that's some of my concern regarding, I think, with switches of new people, there needs to be some education. And that's my big thing right now, is just trying to get people educated on accounting, because each department, again, it's decentralized. And so I have reports that I look at because I have that financial background. And if I see things, I go to either department head or the accounting department and ask them to fix it, or have a reason why this is the way it is. Because if the public sees it, you should have backup for it or explanation. So I have a hard time wanting to say, yes, remove these kind of stipulations to run for city clerk because of what I see, right? And then some of it, right when I became city clerk, the city manager back then was having a hard time for me to be reviewing finance. And my attitude is, there's history related to the finance department being under the city clerk, and then going to the city manager and back to the city clerk. However, my look at it was, I don't need the finance department under me, because I already know accounting enough to go and just have access to the accounting system and be able to run reports. Because when I was an accounting manager, there was things that I found that had to be cleaned up. And so knowing that, now I review some of those things to make sure we keep staying that process. So part of me feels that there needs to be a lot of education as people leave, people come back, or employees have an old way of doing methods when they shouldn't be doing it that way anymore. And then the issue is budget and staff. So when the budget gets tight, there's less staff. That's where you see some of the errors. And then when it comes back up, which is rare, then people are catching up. And then people so the thing with different that's related to government and corporate is when you're in corporate, you can sometimes, majority of times, you have the person that's leaving there for 2 weeks to train your next person. In government, you might not get that person or replace that person. It's already retired, and it's 3 months or 6 months down the line. There have been some processes when I was in finance that just got dropped because the person retired, and they were the only ones who ran that process. And so that's and then the other issue, we're not going related to public, whether it's appointed. I had another thing related to whether it's appointed or elected, because I feel it should be elected. But the other thing is, the information I provided was the sample ballots or the elections. There was 4 elections. Majority of them were to remove the finance and put it to the city manager. And every time it's failed. So I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if you have any questions.
If I could, this is not pejorative to you. This is
Right,
about
no,
what
no.
happens after you.
Right.
And the issue to me is that the structure of the city has changed. The quality of finance departments has changed. And to put a stricture on a future city clerk, whether appointed or elected, to be an accounting maven is unfortunate, because the primary responsibility of a city clerk is to be a city clerk and not to be a budget manager, which is part of what you have budget responsibility
Right.
in the charter, which makes no sense. So what the intent of this is to clean that up so that in the future, when the next person comes along who either gets appointed or gets elected, that the reason that they got elected was for their clerk skills, as opposed to this artificial accounting part of what that job calls for. You say that there are mistakes all through.
Right.
You go to any business, you're going to
Right.
find mistakes.
Exactly.
So it's not that's not really the issue. If a finance director isn't doing their job, they can get fired. But what we're trying to, again, getting back to roles and responsibilities, that this seems to be one of those parts of the responsibility of the clerk that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I would like to clean that up, in part because it makes available to us a potential cadre of either appointed or elected officials that we could not have because of that 15 units accounting issue. And the 15 units accounting issue is associated with everything essentially that's in subsection F.
Okay. Ms. Wonderly?
I wanted to ask, based on the fact that you've been doing this role for a long time, do you think that the items F1 through 6 need to be cleaned up? Or do you perform those roles in your position?
Yeah, I think some of it would probably need to be cleaned up. I mean, in the sense of that, if I don't, considering right now, the finance department's under the city manager. But I feel that the city clerk should have some kind of oversight in the finance.
So instead of deleting them, potentially revising to be more accurate with what is the current model of government?
Because I think, again, the check and balance
Yeah, and
You
the
have-
key thing I heard when you talked, and Eleanor, that's the most I've ever heard you speak. I thought that was awesome.
I know, I don't say much.
But that
I'm that unicorn, but I am real.
You should be seen and not heard, right?
that point of the check and balance that you provide is that you catch things, and I think that is a critical role. Maybe there's ways to rewrite this to have that role still be available
Yes,
and part of it, but it's not that you're looking whether or not the content is correct, but is it done correctly, maybe?
right.
And that is an important role. And I appreciate you pointing that out. This, in concept, I think everything you've done here merits more discussion,
Okay.
in all fairness. And what I would like to see with it next is similar to what we talked about with item I2, was maybe a more refined modification, maybe a strike through, and what would you actually propose in reading rather than conceptually, because conceptually, I think I get it, but I'd like to see it and make it more easily discussable.
I thought it was relatively clear. Everything after E is gone.
Well, on that one
Pretty
point,
straightforward.
but there's,
I understand what you're saying about oversight. That is, once you put something into the charter that you have oversight, what does oversight mean? Does that mean you yell when something's wrong, or you have something that you can actually do to change things? Can you put a stop to this? If something comes along and you don't see something, can you put a stop to it? In some ways, you can here.
Right.
And that may not be right. I don't think that's right. I think your responsibility is to raise the issues that you might see, but I don't think that you have the authority, I should have the authority to stop something.
Who should have that authority?
The city council. Everything flows from the city council.
Well, no,
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 no.
everything doesn't flow from the city council, it flows from the voters. The voters get to say what they want, and that's why we have elections. But more to your point, before you were saying, at least I thought you were saying, in a previous discussion, that we need to educate people more about what their council members in particular, when we were talking about budget revisions and things like that. This is the same thing. It's education, especially when you deal with the clerk. You're going to elect someone, I'll just say by fluke, who is living in a tent over in some park somewhere, and they happen to run, they got sympathy, and basically speaking, they're a product of a very poor education system. That's what you risk here by not having an education requirement. You can say, well, yeah, but yeah, buts don't get it.
Well, you could make it so that there's a requirement that you be a Mensa candidate. So
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. I said that you need to have a basic understanding of what the job that you're getting. Being a clerk, just using that term doesn't work. Using a title, a treasurer, it doesn't work. They have to have some form of, I'll just say, responsibility and fiduciary responsibilities that they're trying to assume on behalf of the public. And the public has to have confidence in what they have to offer for this. Why don't we just do away with a law degree for a city attorney or a city manager who has absolutely no experience? Well, we just go out and pick one, because we don't want that. We want people who understand business, they understand the numbers and math, and we're placing our faith in them so that they can do that job. And that's what the voters want. One second here. I don't care if the city manager is not the city manager, but the city treasurer is a part-time or full-time. I do care of whether or not he's in there and he's looking over the shoulder of people who are doing, and he understands what he sees, and he's just not a pawn. Okay, all right? So when we present this to the voters, they have to have confidence in the changes that we want them to do. And I don't think by eliminating education requirements, whatever they may be, you can pick on the 15 units of accounting and its history all you want, or people's financial histories, meaning their professional history. But the fact is, if they don't have confidence, they're not going to vote. I don't mean they can't get their voters out. I'm meaning the people are not going to vote because they're going to look at it as more of the same from government.
Well, let me give you the argument back to you. Let's talk about the accounting part. The accounting part is an odd structure for a city clerk. Nowhere in here does it say they have to be a certified municipal clerk. There is such a thing, and you are a certified municipal clerk.
Yes.
And that has nothing to do with
Did she
accounting.
become one after she became a clerk?
I came, after I was in this,
Exactly my point.
So, but it's possible that you could say, in order for them to be a city clerk, they have to be a certified municipal clerk.
How would you become one?
People can become, they go to school.
You're winnowing down the pool,
You're winnowing down the pool by putting 15 units of accounting in.
but it's a reasonable winning.
I-
I mean, again, you wouldn't hire a lawyer that didn't go to law school. No.
No offense, I'm an accountant also, so.
But the issue
I
of
can tell you,
There you go.
these are
Perfect,
basic
perfect.
classes that are not.
Perfect.
It's the issue of accounting as a
That's
city
what the clerk
role.
does.
No, they don't.
Don't you go to the movies and watch the clerk sits there?
Primary thing that
That's what clerks do.
those are old clerks.
Clerks, they're clerks, that's right.
But the city clerks are record keepers and record managers.
They are now, that's what I assumed.
That's exactly what I'm talking about here.
But
That
she
is the
doesn't
role.
just do, and I'm talking about Eleanor here, she doesn't just do record keeping, she doesn't just do archiving and putting things in the vault. She doesn't do, she does other things. She explained that.
I understand that, but the point is not to talk about individuals. This is about the job description.
Again, I don't see an individual, I see the city clerk when I look over there. All right, I'm not looking at Eleanor, I'm looking at the city clerk. If I want something from the city clerk, I don't care who it is. I do care that they know what they're doing.
I would agree, but the reason that it has 15 units of accounting in here is that there are accounting responsibilities. My belief, and it is my belief, is that that does not belong in the city clerk's purview. That is in the finance department.
Again, it was pointed out that the finance department has flip-flopped back and forth. It's not in the charter,
No,
okay? So let's keep with the charter and what her responsibilities are, and meaning the clerk. And so if,
Mr. Scrooge.
yeah, Mr. Scrooge, that's right. For those of you who didn't get the reference.
Okay, let's look at wrapping this up one way or the other for now.
Okay, well, my point only is that we need to present to the voters something that is viable for a change. And if you eliminate education, again, I think it's a non-starter. I think, if you say, hey, we're going to get rid of these accounts, you can make it 30, you can make them CPAs. But again, I don't see the value in that. Now, if you want to rewrite the education levels, I'm all ears. Let me hear them. But, if you think you can eliminate it and think that that's a good idea, I don't think so.
committee member Solomon has his hand up.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Solomon.
If I could, yes, thank you. If I could, please, I think it'd be worthwhile when we bring this item back, if we could get some input. Mr. Deals mentioned it as, and also Committee Member Wonderly asked the clerk about it. If we could get an idea of what things specifically they think could be assigned or codified within the charter as a change. They both mentioned that. And if we could get from the city manager, perhaps, or we don't have a full-time finance director right now, we have an interim finance director. If we could get some input from the city manager or the interim director as to where we could clean up language with regard to delegating responsibilities to the appropriate person. I think that would help us in in our next discussion.
Yeah, I think, that you brought up an excellent point. What are the requirements to be hired as the finance manager? Okay, that's up to the city attorney. I mean, the city manager, excuse me. So we're not getting a check and balance here. If we're going to leave the clerk in the charter, and I personally don't, under the treasurer, I don't see anything there that I would change. I think all those are responsibilities that I want as a check and balance. You might want to reword some things, but as far as the clerk goes, yeah, we could clean up that language, and bring it up to date, bring it into the 21st century. But as far as eliminating the education or requirements, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's going to fly at all. That's like, no offense, Mr. Chair, but that would be like having an engineer who basically went to kindergarten. You don't want that. Not when you're putting rocket ships up in the sky.
If I'm not mistaken, I must remember, this is a long ago memory, but when I was on the League of California Cities Board, there was a city clerk's division.
Yeah.
And I asked them, is there a city that has an accounting requirement? To get 15 units, the whole deal. They looked at me like I had lost what's left of my mind. This is a strange artifact of this city. And all I'm saying is that there are plenty of things that for educational requirements of being a city clerk that you could put in here. It's the accounting part that doesn't make any sense.
So why don't we put the other ones in with the accounting part?
To me, the existence of the accounting part is an artifact that it's time-consuming. I understand.
Yeah, I think it begs the question, if not the city clerk, then who? Then, if we take it out of here,
I agree.
would we want to somehow assign it somewhere else so it's still there? Because the check and balance does need to be there, is what I'm hearing.
It belongs to the finance, it always belongs to the city council.
Yeah, that's where you
Solomon,
clarify
yes.
the roles and responsibilities to the appropriate department or employee.
Okay.
That's where you ask for clarification from those elected officials and the finance department as to how this could be clarified and to who.
Okay. Is there a motion here on how we would like to proceed with this item?
Well, for me, I would like to move that we continue this to the next agenda with more specifics regarding the actual wording of both of these sections. Have it for the next time, including city clerk and city treasurer roles and responsibilities. I'm not again talking about elected versus appointed.
Independent of elected or appointed.
Why can't we include that in the discussion next time?
Sorry?
Why can't we include elective or appointed in the discussion next time?
This is a separate,
I think it
the
complicates it.
sections that are in here are roles and responsibilities. There's a separate section of the charter that says what is or is not an elected official.
Yeah, it's Article 10, Section 10,
Right. So,
which is what we're talking about next time anyway.
correct.
Okay, so your motion is understood. Is there a second?
Seconded it already. Had an interest in collegiality.
Thank you, sir.
All right. I think we're okay without a roll call on this. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None opposed.
Okay, thank you.
So we will carry this with the further information that you had described. Give us a little more meat to chew on there. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Spindler. Next item. J4, discussion of possible action regarding setup of
Sorry for the
mayor.
interruption. I do want to say thank you for the heavy lift. It's long overdue. Thanks, bye.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Discussion of possible action regarding setup of mayor and council members.
This is
Mr.
again me-
Penzler.
This is again me tilting at windmills, but this has been, if you've read through the old charter review commissions, this is something that I have believed in a long time. This city is a unicorn. We have a city structure, not only with the stuff we were just talking about, which is a unicorn, but we have a unicorn regarding the way that the mayor and council members are set up. The history goes back to just post World War I. And the election of a separate mayor was in the belief that, at the time, a administrative mayor was more of an accepted role than it has become. City managers didn't really come into operation until after World War II. And even this city did not specifically say that we had a council a manager form of government until the 60s. We have a person who is elected mayor, who is the only person elected citywide, but cannot make a motion and cannot vote on the council with the exception of a negative vote, being a veto, unless there's a tie, and that's an odd situation that happens on occasion, but not very often. Most cities who have odd-numbered council members either have a mayor that is an accidental mayor, that every 9 months or so it gets rotated to them, or such as a city like El Segundo, where the council selects a mayor, and that is in sort of an indeterminate term. So you could be a mayor for 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, as long as the majority of the council says so. Or like Torrance, for example, they separately elect a mayor, and that mayor is part of the council. And my belief has always been, and frankly, it was one of the reasons that when I had the opportunity to, I did not decide to run for mayor, was that when you are in that position and you cannot, in public, be a part of the decision-making, it doesn't make any sense. So to me, our system is a relic. It needs to be changed. And my recommendation is that there be a 5-member council of which one person is elected citywide, that person is the mayor, and that there be 4 councilmanic districts, and that everyone who is elected to office be an active participant in the operation of the city. The mayor is not an administrator. It's unlike Los Angeles, it's unlike Long Beach. It's very rare in this city, in this state, to have an elected, separately elected mayor that is not a part of the city council. And my belief is that it's time to revisit that. And I sent you all a memo about that. I think you all got it, right?
Member comments? Sure. Ms. Morocco.
So let's go back historically, because this is, I think, the one in your memo you mentioned that this is a version from World War I. First of all, our charter in 49 did say that we were a city manager form of government, and that was brought about because of some issues with corruption going on with the way that the city was set up in the 35 charter. What we had before the charter was there, and I think what you're proposing is similar to what was actually put in place. We had a board of trustees, and the board of trustees sat down and decided that they would pick the person to be the president of the board of trustees, which was the equivalent of a mayor. What we have now is one person who's elected citywide as part of the elected officers like the treasurer and the clerk and the city attorney. And then you have smaller areas so that the people can actually have larger representation. I didn't hear anything from what you were saying that the system that we have doesn't work. And our city has evolved, and maybe the consideration should be that we should think about some other form, but I think cutting it back to 4 council members and as at-large mayor from the whole city, I think is contrary to more involvement in the public and the representation of government. So I think that your premise may be completely erroneous for starting us on this path, but it's something, again, we should probably look at just to get a sense of it, but I think the structure with 4 plus the mayor is not going to work.
Okay, I heard I didn't hear a why, but that's it. Come back to that.
Solomon.
Mr. Solomon?
Mr. Pinsler, how does it work? You're eliminating a council district.
Right,
So you'd have
4 council
you
districts,
have a realignment of the 5 districts into 4
yes,
and 1 citywide elected position
right,
that would serve as the mayor. Would the mayor serve then for 4 years? Yes.
yes. Just like Torrance. Torrance has the exact setup. There's 6 council members, each districted, now districted, they used to be at large, because they're large enough that they came under state law to be required. The city of Anaheim is the same way. The city, the mayor is the only citywide. They have now, again, districts throughout the city, and it's an odd-numbered group so that there aren't ties. And so it's, city of Fresno has the same thing. In fact, city of San Francisco, which happens to be a county as well, and they have a board of supervisors, but it's essentially the same thing. Their person who is the president of the board, who is the mayor, is actually a member of the governing board. It's rare to find a non-active mayor. Los Angeles is an example where you have a separately elected mayor who is an administrator and is not a part of the city council. And I understand that of a city of the size of Los Angeles. But there is almost none other that exists in that way. And so again, we are somewhat of a unicorn. And I thought that it was an opportunity to revisit this kind of a structure. Now, I understand there are advantages and disadvantages to a mayor, to a vetoing mayor. But my goal in this is not to deal with any specific political setup. It's whether or not it operates in a manner which I believe provides representation. And vetoing in this situation, I don't believe is the best way for a person to be elected to office, that their primary goal is to be there to veto if they have to.
Question?
Yes.
Seems like, I get the point, and I see the advantages and disadvantages of this. You're going from 5 districts to 4 districts and then citywide. That's a lot of changes from the standpoint of how would you 4 and 5 together? I know we're a weird city with this big rectangle up here in North Redondo and 3 and down South Redondo, and there's all kinds of suspicions about that. So would you combine, it just opened a lot of can of worms. If this got to go through the city council and the voters, me as someone who's pretty involved in this political stuff for quite a while, I'm a kind of shell-shocked by it. I'm wondering what would be the public's reaction to it and city council's
You would
reaction.
redistrict just like you would anyway. For example, just physically, the boundaries of 1 would move a little bit north, the boundaries of 5 would move a little bit south, and 2, 3, and 4 would combine into 2. That's basically the way it would work. And you would redistrict just like you would redistrict anyway. Now, we could actually relatively simply, since it's all on computers now, we could make up a sample map that shows what 4 districts would be. But again, this is not about the people who are in office at this point. or anything about that. This is about what this is my belief, that the structure of the governing body of the city should be. That anybody who sits up here should be able to make a motion, should be required to vote, and to be a part of the active operation of the city.
So would any of the powers or duties of the mayor remain
Everything remains,
differently?
except for vetoing. No, the vetoing is the only thing that would change. They would vote rather than veto.
Yeah, one of the concerns I would
How would
have,
the term limits?
Mr. Solomon, say it again, please.
How would the term limits change then, Mr. Penzler? So right now, as it stands, a person could be on council for 8 years and then ascend into the mayor's role for another 8 years. Would the idea be that the person in the mayor's role, it would be, they could not migrate from city council 8 years into the mayor's role, or
No,
they could?
It's a separate position. Yes, they could move from being a council member to being, just like now, being a council member to being a mayor. They could be a 4-term total, because they are separate positions. Council members and mayors would be a separate position.
One of the concerns I would see is this could further exacerbate the north versus south.
Such is life. If you wanted to, which you can do, you can redistrict from east to west rather than from north to south.
And I thought about that, a vertical districting.
You
It's a possibility, because
you
the
can
other
do
thing,
that as well.
the other thing that happens is the voting numbers of the south are higher. Historically, always have been, may not be that way forever, but definitely have been. So it's going to be more likely that any at-large position is going to tend to be someone from the south. That's not hard, cast in stone,
Not
but
cast in stone.
Yeah, I definitely hear that one as a North Redondo, our second
As a
class citizen sometimes, I feel. But I don't see how it cannot be political, because I've seen how all of this
Of course
has
it's
been.
political.
Yeah,
Everything is political.
yeah, and I see, and my machinations go as one is,
Argument for me.
as one has seen a big shift when Brand came in from ASPO, and then the council shift, and everyone's going to have their different views, and I loved ASPO, I hate Brand, but there's just so many degrees of freedom as a background in statistics and all, and how this would play out with the districts, and how it just makes me suspicious, and I don't see how people cannot get, this is a big change.
Yeah, any change
As a
is hard.
neuropsychologist, change is hard.
Any change is hard, but
Representation for
Yeah.
people, and I don't think anybody's interested in that right now, personally. Like, less representation. You are going to go from having 1/5 of the population have someone to go to that's in their, district, that is looking out for the needs of their local community. I mean, it's the most local you can get. So for me, to make that even like a little bit less local is just painful, really.
a district would go from 15,000 people to 17,500 people.
Like I said, even a little bit less local. I like that we have that. I
We might
like
as well
being a
have
uniform
30
city.
then. We might as well have
I've
30
loved learning about how we're
districts.
so different than so many other cities, and now I'm like, no wonder how come I've loved living here for so long.
Take the word in a
It's a place
unicorn.
of innovation and difference.
Let's have 31 districts.
Why take away from people's
That's going to be a big
current
dais.
level
Yeah.
of representation?
The point is
That's
that for us now, it seems like a big change.
But to get what? The mayor having more power?
Mayor doesn't have any more power. He has less power. He's just one of 5 members. Now he has the opportunity to veto.
And what's wrong with that? I
If it's
guess I'd be
3-2.
interested to hear.
3-2 votes are part of what government is about. The fact that it has to be a 4 vote is the reason that the veto power is anti-democratic.
So maybe why do we have a mayor at all?
Well, first of all, this anti-democratic thing is, we do live in a republic, not a democracy.
I understand.
Okay, so keep that in mind when you
Yep.
throw the words around. There's a phrase I've been wanting to use. I heard this a couple months ago. unicorn flatulence.
You know, where what?
Flatulence. Think about it for a second, okay?
Thank you for that.
Okay, all right, so we can be a unicorn, but remember, I think what we're blowing here is unicorn flatulence. So, you know, again, we're on something that is going nowhere.
Okay.
I don't see the voters even looking at this.
Okay. Any members of the public like to speak? Zoom or E? Okay. Any further discussion?
I think you may have a better shot if you actually expand the council to 7, since we have 7 chairs up here, because that will address at least the representation issue. You won't have North Redondo, who's actually, when it comes time to these big changes, actually you need them on board. You won't have them saying we're not getting the services that we are entitled to. But I think then you'll at least have people able to participate that way. And you can have your mayor be the 7th person.
I'm not trying to add, and I'm not trying to add people to this. I'm trying to.
Is there a motion for this item?
Five is a great standard for city councils around the state. There are occasional 7s.
Is there a motion for this item?
I would like to move that we bring this back for further discussion.
Is there a second?
Thank you all very much. Get a chance to vent my
I
spleen.
helped you out on the last one.
That's all right.
You're too far out on this.
I understand.
Okay.
Hearing no second, it does not continue. No further discussion on that item then. Coming back then to item I1, discussion and possible action regarding Article 11, Section 11.2, City Attorney.
I do have a question on that one. Was the city attorney supposed to get us somebody from like Torrance or the League of California Cities for
Wait a minute,
today?
here he is.
Oh, there he is.
Speak of the city attorney.
So there's a blue folder item. So I did talk, so first there's the, pursuant to the motion, there's the 2-year municipal law firms that the city has used. And you asked for other municipal law firms that you could contact to come in and hear from the serves as city attorney. I contacted the league because I thought that might be the best way so that they're more unbiased, and got a list of municipal law firms that sponsor this year's city attorney conference. So if they wanted to market themselves to cities, that's the place to do so. I made some notes on that. There are firms we've used in the past, but older than 2 years. There's a couple that may have, one that does have a conflict because they're suing the city actively and threatening lawsuits in other cases that you have probably read about in the paper recently, so they would be a bad choice. One other firm represents a lot of police organizations that our department officers may be members of, so I leave that to you to go decide who you want to contact. I contacted Patrick Sullivan, the Torrance city attorney, per your direction, offered to have him speak to you via Zoom. He thanked you for the invitation, but respectfully declined. As I indicated, when I'm asked to speak to commissions in other cities, I have always declined to do so. You don't have enough to do in your own city. You don't necessarily want to inject yourself. And finally, I talked to Corey Manning. I wasn't sure last time, but she's returned from family leave. She's the general counsel for the League of California Cities. So she has returned recently. She paused and then said she needed to think about it and speak to her people. She's really busy right now because the annual conference of the league is coming up in 2 weeks from today in Long Beach. And so she asked that, it wasn't yes, it wasn't no. She asked that I circle back with her following the conference. But you now have a list of firms that you can, cross-check against who we've paid, who you think.
And you said one of those firms was actively suing the city?
Rattan and Tucker. Rattan and Tucker, I noted that on
It's
the,
on there. It says on there.
It's not underlined or not highlighted, but it's there.
Third from the bottom.
Got it there.
yeah, they're representing the new owner of the C Lab, and also have sent letters threatening litigation in an entirely other matter. So I
I
would,
think we need to know any more about that.
yeah, they're a good firm, but,
Say that.
yeah. So anyways,
No, this is great. This is what we were looking for. It's
Yeah.
appreciated. One of the things I would look to do is make some contacts then and admit some invitations to come and speak.
Yeah,
and hear the other side of things. And
yeah, but perfectly appropriate. And that's why I wanted to give it to you, and I wanted that list to be objective,
Yeah,
And so by having the whole, the list of who sponsors,
the LCC list was a good check and balance to that. And I've already gone through that to see which ones were on both lists. And also I took a look at who are the acting city attorneys of, RPV and Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach and Torrance, El Segundo, and how long they've been there. And, for example, El Segundo since 1996. So most of the other ones were longer term, at least 5 to 10 years. And some of those, I think, I believe it was RPV had made a change in 2015 because somebody underbid the existing one, and then they made another slight change within the same firm in 2018, but still been there for 7 years, same firm. So appreciated, and I will help with making some contacts. If there's anyone that wants to chime in on that, I'm open to that.
I'm always available.
Okay.
I'm retired as well.
That doesn't mean you're not busy, just that you're
Oh,
retired.
I am busy. There's no
Not to
doubt
do it
about
as
that.
a subcommittee or anything like that, but just,
Okay, but if,
just so
I can
long
hold
as,
it, and you know
as
you want
long
me-
as it's not a majority of you,
as long as it's not a what?
a majority of you.
You always come to that, don't you?
it's his job.
Keeping the subcommittees to 2 people.
It's wonderful.
No, and that's the appropriate next steps, I believe, is to make some contacts and see if we can get some people to come and speak and, hear if it's a pitch, I'm fine with that, but just to hear the other side of the coin. Any further discussion on this? This is what I was looking for this evening.
I have a couple of
Yes,
questions.
Mr. Morocco.
So I do appreciate you sending me the org chart. Is this the normal size that you are familiar with city attorney staff? Because
Well, it depends. Like, for example, I did send an email late. So like Torrance, for example, I looked on, so we have 11 full-time, not counting the housing navigator that is only temporarily there and really shouldn't necessarily be in the city attorney's office. Torrance had like 13.6, and they've reduced it as part of their budget cuts to 13. So.
And then I think I recall from one of the meetings, you were going to come up with financial numbers?
Yeah, just because of the press of duty, I was not able to do that. I will shoot for your next meeting.
Okay.
So with that, I would make a motion just to continue this item to our next meeting.
So moved.
And to assign the 2 of you to calling duty.
That's fine.
Contact duty.
Contact duty. So
I'll accept that, yes.
you made the motion, or you want to make, okay,
I made the motion, and I'm going to accept the friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment,
from my
okay.
Congenial colleague down there.
And I will,
If you're doing it by Zoom, I mentioned that I have a colleague who functions as a city attorney for a number of different communities, and she may be able to participate. So I can, if you don't have any success, then this is only 3, so just tell me and I'll see if I can get arrange her to, at least to be available by Zoom. It's fine.
Arranging a meeting doesn't come under the, it's substantive discussions that are issues.
Well,
it
yeah,
gets,
so the
it goes
problem is
beyond
who you
that.
pick could be substantive, which is why I didn't want to be involved, because you wanted a different point of view. And that's why I went to the league. And so it'd just be best not to have 4, so.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. And
Aye.
Mr. Eric, thank you. Any opposed? Okay, we will continue that to the next meeting. We will work in the interim to get some people to come and speak with us.
We're just gonna need a wheelbarrow for the next meeting. Just keep pushing things off.
Everything's being pushed off.
See you, Mike.
All right, let me go back to agenda. That concludes. So member items and referrals to staff. Mr. DeWidziak,
None.
Mr. Solomon.
Yes, please, be brief. I'd like to, using the one-step process, allow us to have a discussion at the next meeting to consider us having 2 meetings in October. We're going to be running up against the deadline of having a report for the city council in November, the first week in November. So I'd like to at least have people consider a couple of dates and have the flexibility of having an extra meeting should we need it in the lead up to our report to the city council.
Eleanor, could you take a look at calendar in October and see if there's something that would work? Right.
I will comment on that. Okay. So our meeting was supposed to be the day of the election, so we got moved for my commission. There were only a couple days, unless you want to meet on a Saturday or unless you want to meet on a Friday, you won't be able to meet in this room and televise it. So that's your choices, I think, on October, other than our standard meeting day.
Yes, we have October 25th and October 31st.
26 is being taken now.
If I,
Yeah, I didn't say the
Do it for
26th, the
Halloween?
25th, and we have our regular meeting
yeah, if
right
I
after
could,
the election.
perhaps, Gene, perhaps September
But
would
that-
be right. Perhaps September would be ripe for 2 meetings,
I agree.
as opposed to October.
But our next scheduled meeting is not until September 22nd. Which is fine if we want to have a meeting after that and have a discussion at our September 22nd meeting, but I don't think that we're allowed to have a discussion, despite the latitude here, to try and figure out a date for September right now.
We can email.
One of the advantages of September 29 is that it is the 5th of a month, which nobody schedules 5ths of the month. So there is an opportunity perhaps there, although there is a,
So 1 week apart, what you're asking?
29th is, actually, it could be a conflict.
I'd like to have the flexibility of having it, and we could always cancel it.
Give me a second, because I actually have, let's see if I have all the, I don't.
So we can do that on the 22nd and still meet notification requirements.
The 29th,
The 22nd is our next meeting.
right?
What I'm saying though, if we were to do the 29th, we could still,
Oh,
we can make that decision tonight,
Sure.
or we could make it on the 22nd, either way.
We can't do it before, so the 22nd.
Because we don't have a meeting until then.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Mr. Chair, the idea for me of setting perhaps that date now is that it gives the staff opportunity, rather than we're on the 22nd and hey, we'd like to be back in a week, there might be some things that they can work on that would be for the first meeting, and then some other things that might be for the second meeting, and have some certainty in their workflow.
So are you okay with the 29th?
I'd be fine with that. I just think that considering the way our discussions have gone and the number of items that we're considering, I think we're going to want to have an extra meeting, or at least the opportunity to have an extra meeting.
At least one.
And
We're going to have a couple.
No, I agree, because there's only 2 meetings left before we're due to
my
report out.
perspective, we should have 2 in September and 2 in October. That's, we can worry about that after we see how September has gone.
Okay.
So you're moving to agendize having 2 meetings in September,
September.
2 meetings in October, with the dates to be specified at the next meeting?
Yes.
Or I think we go ahead with the 29th now for September and a TBD on the October date.
Right. I mean, I guess you can do a Saturday. And that's the thing, or Friday.
And how much time do you need to write the report?
Couple months. Yes, Mr. Webb.
I was only asking for it, Mike. I know it's not on the agenda.
So all I was going to say is it might just be better as a referral to the clerk to come back with available dates, because on every agenda is your adjournment and when you're adjourning to. And that way she can come back with all the dates. As a practical matter, I don't think it will matter to staff, because staff's going to prepare everything for your next meeting. And as you recall, when we meet 1 week apart, there isn't time to do a lot of staff report. It's more so that when your discussions go, if you get really detailed for half of it, then you'll know you have the following week to finish the other half. So it might be better for just referral to the clerk to come back with all available dates for, potential meetings in September and October. And I think it's a good idea to plan on those extra
Yeah,
meetings.
well, either way, we'd be adjourning to the 22nd unless we were to choose a date before then, and I don't think that's happening right now.
Yeah, so you can choose the 22nd then and direct her, and she'll come back with all the available dates.
Well, the available dates for October I already have, because we had
Oh, yeah.
to change the historical commission. So we had October 25th or October 31st. Or a Saturday. But, it's going to be really hard for me because of the election.
Yeah.
Because we're doing the election on the 19th, and then we're doing the final on the 27th. And in between there, we're doing ballots. And we're here.
When's the first meeting in November for the city council, please, Eleanor?
That was November 7th, no?
What was that again?
I thought I remember the date of November 7th, but it might be November 1st. That's the first.
November 1st.
That is
Oh,
the first
November
Tuesday of
1st,
November.
Yes, November 1st.
No, so if we meet on October 31st,
There's no way to get anything to.
that, whatever our report is, has to be done long before,
Right.
it would have to be done long before October 31st.
Correct.
Because it would not be able to be on the agenda for the first.
So if we are to meet in a second meeting in October, it will probably have to be on a weekend.
But let's
Yeah,
keep
you'll have to
that as an
think.
option, and
Yep.
let's look at that.
So we should agendize the 29th, so it shows up on it, and then we can just do a substitute motion for the date as that bears out on a different date. So at least it's on the agenda.
For September, right?
September, we need
Or
22 and
September?
29.
The 22 is going to be what it says on this thing, but the one for September 22nd, we'll have to have a adjournment date. And if we have it on the agenda that we're doing the 29th and it turns out not to be the good date, then we can just substitute it out. It's on the agenda and we're having that discussion at that point.
Yeah, that's fine, because then people know, it's not so much staff, but you all know, the members of the public know.
Yep.
But you can always change
And I
it.
don't think there's anything on the 29th. That's the 5th Thursday. So, but I don't know if GPAC's doing something that, I don't know. So I'll find out by Monday.
Okay. So we're continuing on, so we have that, you're going to come back with dates. We are adjourning we will adjourn later this evening to just the 22nd, but we can add dates subsequent to that. Okay.
And I'll keep it open. I'll put a temporary for the 29th.
Okay.
It's the 5th of.
Because, I mean, they're going quickly.
But it's the 5th of a month, which is rare.
Right, but there are, the GPAC is another one that's always looking for dates, and then sometimes they do special.
Do we want to just
So-
set it now as a second meeting?
She's saying, she said, he'd take it now.
Take it.
Okay.
I'm
I'm
so
good.
happy to take it before anyone else tries to.
Right.
So the referral to staff is to set another meeting for the 29th.
Okay.
Mr. Solomon, does that work?
Yes, thank you.
And then you'll come back with other possible dates for October. Okay, Mr. Morocco.
Okay, so Eugene took my first comment. My second one is, are we going to get minutes for any of our meetings?
Yes, the next one, you'll have the last three. We've just been trying to get the voter information guide, and that's always.
It's not like you have nothing to do.
So, yeah, we've been looking at them, but I had a couple of issues with them, so we're looking at them again, and then it'll be in the next meeting, all three.
The videos are rolling up, right?
Yes, oh, yeah, that's goes in within 24 hours.
How is those 15 units of accounting helping you out there?
Actually,
Was
I know.
rhetorical.
I know.
Yeah, let's, Mr. Pinsler,
Surprise.
referrals to staff.
Thanks.
Mr. Light,
No.
Ms. Wonderly,
Nope.
and I have none as well. I think we're good with where we're headed, and appreciate everybody's time tonight. With that, we will adjourn to our next regular meeting on 7 PM, September 22nd. Motion and a second to adjourn. Second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
Bye.